My son looked me dead in the eye and spit on the ground between us. The rain was pouring down in sheets soaking through my thin flannel shirt, but his stare was colder than the water running down my back. He reached into his leather wallet, pulled out a crumpled $10 bill, and threw it at my chest. It fluttered in the wind before sticking to the wet pavement near my muddy boots. "Take this and get lost, old man," he sneered, his voice cutting through the thunder. "Buy yourself some dog food, because that is all you are worth." I stood there shivering, looking at the boy I had raised, the boy I had sacrificed everything for. He slammed the heavy oak door in my face, engaging the deadbolt with a final heartless click. I bent down, my arthritic knees popping, and picked up the wet $10 bill. I did not cry. I did not beg. I simply smoothed out the money and placed it in my pocket. Because he didn't know. He didn't know that the shivering old man he just kicked out was not a beggar. He didn't know that I, Winston Graves, owned the very ground he was standing on. 9 months later, he would drop to those same knees begging for my forgiveness. But before I tell you how I destroyed his world to save his soul, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments which city you are listening from. Now let's go back to where the nightmare began, exactly 30 minutes before I was thrown into the storm. It started with a sound that I will never forget. The sound of shattering crystal echoing against marble floors. I was standing in the living room of the house I had secretly paid for, my hands trembling violently. It was the Parkinson's and the arthritis, a double curse that had been stealing my dexterity year by year. I had simply tried to move a crystal vase from the edge of the table to a safer spot. But my fingers, those traitorous fingers that used to fix heavy diesel engines in the freezing cold, had betrayed me. The vase slipped. It hit the floor and exploded into 1,000 glittering shards. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, came rushing in from the kitchen like a hurricane. She was a woman who valued objects more than people, and her eyes went wide with horror, not for me but for the glass on the floor. "You useless old fool," she screamed, her face twisting into a mask of pure ugly rage. "Do you have any idea how much that cost? That was Waterford crystal. It is worth more than your entire existence." I tried to apologize. My voice was weak, raspy from the cold. I couldn't shake. "I am sorry, Jessica," I said, reaching down to try and pick up a large piece of glass. My hand was shaking so bad I cut my thumb, a drop of bright red blood falling onto her pristine white rug. "Don't you dare bleed on my rug," she shrieked, kicking my hand away with her expensive slipper. "Get away from it. You destroy everything you touch. You are like a plague in this house, Winston. A dirty, clumsy, shaking plague." She didn't call me Dad. She didn't call me Mr. Graves. Just Winston. Spoken with the same tone one would use for a stray dog that had wandered into a 5-star restaurant. I stood up slowly, clutching my bleeding thumb. I wanted to tell her that the rug she was so worried about was bought with the dividends from a single stock trade I made in 1995. I wanted to tell her that I could buy a factory full of Waterford crystal vases and smash them all just for entertainment. But I stayed silent. I had to stick to the plan. Just then the front door opened. Marcus walked in. My son. My hope. He was wearing a sharp navy suit, looking every bit the successful advertising executive. He shook his umbrella, droplets of water flying everywhere, and looked at the scene. His wife fuming, his father bleeding, the broken glass. I felt a surge of relief. Marcus would fix this. Marcus knew I was sick. Marcus knew I meant well. "Honey, look what he did," Jessica cried out, pointing an accusing finger at me, playing the victim perfectly. "He smashed the vase, the one my mother gave us. He is out of control, Marcus. I can't take it anymore. It is him or me. I am not living in a nursing home for clumsy geriatrics." Marcus looked at me. I stepped forward, offering a small, hopeful smile. "It was an accident, son," I said softly. "My hands, they just gave out. I will pay for it. I will fix it." Marcus let out a long, exhausted sigh. He didn't ask if I was hurt. He didn't ask about the blood on my hand. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust that cut deeper than any shard of glass. "You can't pay for it, Dad," Marcus said, his voice cold and detached. "You don't have a dime to your name. We pay for your food. We pay for your medicine. We give you a roof over your head. And this is how you repay us, by destroying our home." The injustice of it burned in my chest. I had transferred $2 million into a blind trust for him just last year, waiting for him to mature enough to receive it. I had paid off his college loans anonymously. I had pulled strings to get him his current job. But to him, I was just a burden. It was an accident, I repeated, my voice firming up just a little. I am tired of accidents, Marcus snapped. He walked over to the closet near the entrance. He grabbed my old worn-out duffel bag, the one I had carried since my days as a union rep. He started throwing things into it. My spare flannel shirt, my blood pressure medicine, my Bible. What are you doing? I asked, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I am doing what I should have done 5 years ago, Marcus said. He zipped the bag shut and shoved it into my chest. I stumbled back, barely keeping my balance. You are leaving, tonight, right now. But it is storming, I said, looking at the dark windows where lightning was flashing. I have nowhere to go, Marcus. I am 73 years old. Not my problem, Jessica chimed in, crossing her arms, a smug smile playing on her lips. Go to a shelter. Go to the government. Just get out of my house. Marcus grabbed my arm. His grip was strong, aggressive. He dragged me toward the door. I didn't fight back. I could have. Old man's strength is a real thing, and I had spent 40 years turning wrenches that weighed more than him. But I let him drag me. I needed to see how far he would go. I needed to know if there was any piece of my heart left inside of him. He opened the front door and the wind howled, spraying rain into the hallway. He pushed me out onto the porch steps. I nearly slipped on the wet concrete. Dad, look, Marcus said, his tone softening for a split second, just enough to give me false hope. This isn't working. You need professional help that we can't afford. You are dragging us down. Jessica is stressed. I am stressed. We need our lives back. You are throwing me away. I said, the rain instantly soaking my hair. I am setting you free, he said, rewriting history in real time to make himself feel better. Then he did the thing that sealed his fate. He reached into his back pocket. He pulled out his wallet. He fished out a single bill. Here, he said, tossing the money at me. It was $10. $10 for a lifetime of love. $10 for the nights I stayed up holding him when he had a fever. $10 for the college tuition. $10 for the silence I kept about his mother's mistakes so he would have a good memory of her. Take this. Get some food. Don't come back until you have your act together, which we both know will be never. The door slammed. The sound was final. I stood in the rain, staring at the wood grain of the door. Inside, I heard them laughing. I heard Jessica say, "Finally, the smell will be gone." I reached down and picked up the $10 bill. I looked at Alexander Hamilton's face. I carefully folded it. 1 fold, 2 folds. I placed it in the pocket of my soaked shirt right over my heart. I will keep this, I whispered to the storm. This is the receipt for your inheritance, son. And you just spent it all. I turned around and walked down the driveway. The neighbors were watching from their windows, faces pressed against the glass, wondering why the old man was walking into a hurricane. I kept my head high. I didn't limp. I forced my legs to march with the rhythm of a soldier going to war. I walked 2 blocks away from the manicured lawns and the pretension of the suburbs. I reached the corner where a large oak tree provided a small shelter from the deluge. I reached into my other pocket, the one with the zipper, and pulled out a simple burner flip phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. It rang once. "Yes, sir," a deep voice answered immediately. "I am ready, Jerome," I said. My voice was no longer the raspy whisper of a sick old man. It was the baritone growl of the man who had negotiated contracts with the toughest trucking unions in Georgia. "We have his location," Sir Jerome replied. "We are 30 seconds away." I hung up. I stood there, water dripping from my nose, watching the streetlights flicker. 30 seconds later, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness. Unlike the SUVs and sedans of the neighborhood, these lights belonged to a predator. A long, sleek black Lincoln town car pulled up to the curb, its engine purring with a quiet, expensive power. The back door flew open before the car even came to a full stop. A large man in a dark suit jumped out holding a massive black umbrella. He didn't look at my wet clothes or my muddy boots with disgust. He looked at me with reverence. He held the umbrella over my head, shielding me from the rain. "Good evening, Chairman Graves." Jerome said, his voice respectful and steady. "I have the heater running. The seat warmers are on." I looked back in the direction of my son's house. I could still see the lights on in the living room. They were probably toasting to their freedom. They were probably calculating how much money they would save on groceries now that I was gone. "Take me to the penthouse in Buckhead, Jerome," I said, sliding into the leather interior that smelled of cedar and success. "And call my legal team. Wake them up. Tell them the vacation is over." "Yes, sir," Jerome said, closing the door softly. As the car pulled away, gliding over the wet asphalt, I pulled the $10 bill out of my pocket again. I held it up to the reading light in the back of the limousine. It was drying out, crisping up in the warm air. "Enjoy your $10, Marcus," I said to the empty air, "because it is the last money you will ever see from me." I sat back and watched the rain streak against the tinted windows. The old, useless father was dead. He died on that porch step. The man riding in the Lincoln was someone else entirely, and he had a lot of work to do. As the heavy door of the Lincoln clicked shut, sealing out the storm and the noise of the thunder, the silence inside the car felt heavy. I sank into the plush leather seat, the warmth of the heater instantly working to chase away the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I reached for the crystal decanter on the side console, my hand still trembling slightly, not just from the Parkinson's, but from the adrenaline of having my heart ripped out by my own flesh and blood. I poured a small amount of amber liquid into a glass and took a sip. It burned, going down a necessary fire to cauterize the wound Marcus had just inflicted. Jerome, my driver and head of security for 20 years, looked at me through the rearview mirror. His eyes were filled with a mixture of rage and sorrow. He had watched Marcus grow up. He had taught the boy how to throw a baseball when I was too busy building an empire. "Shall I call the police, sir?" Jerome asked, his voice low and dangerous. "What they did is elder abuse. We can have them in cuffs before midnight." "No," I said, staring out at the rain-slicked streets of Atlanta passing by. "Prison is too easy. It is too quick. They need to understand the weight of their actions. They need to feel the cold, just like I did." I pulled my burner phone out of my wet pocket, removed the SIM card, and snapped it in half. Then I reached into the hidden compartment of the armrest and retrieved my actual phone, a sleek, encrypted device that connected me to the pulse of the city. I dialed a number that was programmed on speed dial. "Sterling," I said when the line connected. Winston, the lawyer's voice, was sharp alert even at this late hour. "I assume the test is over." "It is over," I replied, watching the skyline of the city I helped build come into view. "They failed, Sterling. They failed spectacularly." There was a pause on the other line. I could hear the scratching of a fountain pen on paper. "I warned you, Winston. I told you that pretending to be a poor retired mechanic for 5 years was a dangerous game. Money changes people, but the lack of it reveals who they really are." "I wanted to believe, Sterling," I said, my voice cracking for the first time. "I wanted to believe that my son loved me for me, not for the Graves' fortune. I wanted to see if he had the character to care for a father who had nothing to offer but wisdom and love. I have my answer. He thinks I am useless. He thinks I am a burden." "So what are your orders, sir?" Sterling asked. "Initiate Phase 1. I said, my voice hardening into steel. "Freeze the assets, but do it slowly. I want them to feel the water rising before they realize they are drowning. And Sterling, send the security team logs from the hidden cameras in the house. I want to see what they do now that the rat is gone." I arrived at my penthouse in Buckhead 30 minutes later. The doorman, shocked to see me in wet flannel and muddy boots, rushed to open the elevator. I ascended to the 45th floor, entering a world of marble gold and silence. This was my real home, the sanctuary I had left behind to play the role of a humble father. I walked into the surveillance room, a wall of monitors glowing in the dark. I sat down and watched the live feed from the house I had just been kicked out of. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was no remorse. There were no tears. Marcus and Jessica were popping a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne that I knew Marcus could not afford on his salary. They were dancing in the living room right over the spot where I had dropped the vase. "To freedom," Jessica shouted, raising her glass. "Finally, the house doesn't smell like Old Spice and Bengay cream anymore. I feel like I can finally breathe." Marcus laughed, clinking his glass against hers. "I should have done it months ago, Jess. You were right. He was just dragging us down. Did you see the look on his face when I gave him the $10? They both roared with laughter. It was a sound that twisted inside my gut. Then I saw Jessica walk over to the hallway table where my duffel bag had been sitting before Marcus threw it out. She noticed something on the floor. She bent down and picked up a small orange pill bottle. "Oh, look," she said, holding it up to the light. "The old man forgot his heart medication. Nitroglycerin. Isn't this for chest pains?" Marcus glanced at it, shrugging his shoulders as he took another sip of wine. "Yeah, he needs those if he gets too stressed. Otherwise his heart could stop." There was a moment of silence. I leaned forward in my chair, praying that my son would do the right thing. Praying that he would say, "We have to find him. We have to give him his medicine." Instead, Jessica tossed the bottle into the trash can with a casual flick of her wrist. Well, she said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. I guess he will just have to learn to be less stressed. We are not his delivery service. Besides, think of the money we will save on prescriptions. Those things are expensive. Marcus didn't fish the bottle out. He didn't protest. He just wrapped his arm around her waist and kissed her neck. So, what are we going to do with his room? He asked. Yoga studio? Jessica replied instantly. I want mirrors on every wall and heated floors. We can start the renovation tomorrow. I turned off the monitor. I couldn't watch anymore. They weren't just ungrateful. They were willing to let me die. That was the moment the last trace of fatherly guilt evaporated from my soul. If they wanted to play with fire, I would burn their whole world down. I slept for 4 hours. When I woke up, the sun was shining over Atlanta, indifferent to the betrayal of the night before. I showered, scrubbing the feeling of the rain off my skin, and dressed in a bespoke Italian suit. I looked in the mirror. The hunched, trembling old man was gone. The Lion of Atlanta was back. I went to my office and called the financial department of Graves Holdings. Good morning, Mr. Graves, the director answered. Good morning, David, I said. I want you to look into the corporate credit account for Marcus Graves, the one I personally guaranteed under the shell company Zenith Marketing. Yes, sir, I have it right here. It has a $50,000 limit. He uses it quite frequently for client entertainment. Cut it, I said. Sir, you heard me. Decline all charges starting immediately. Flag it for fraud investigation. And do it right around lunchtime. I hung up and checked Marcus's schedule. I had access to his digital calendar because technically I owned the server his company used. Today was a big day for him. He was taking the vice president of a major tech firm to lunch at Le Bernardin, the most expensive seafood restaurant in the city. He was trying to close a deal that would get him a promotion. I sat back and waited. At 1:00 p.m. I could imagine the scene perfectly. Marcus would be sitting at the best table wearing his arrogance like a crown. He would be ordering the tasting menu, the reserve wine, laughing loudly at the client's jokes. He would be feeling on top of the world, thinking about his new yoga room and his freedom from his burden of a father. At 2:15 p.m. my phone buzzed with a notification from the bank. Transaction declined. Amount $640. I closed my eyes and pictured it. The waiter, polite but firm, returning to the table. The quiet whisper. Sir, there seems to be a problem with your card. Marcus would laugh it off. Try it again, he would say. It's a platinum card. The waiter would walk away and come back 2 minutes later. I am sorry, sir. The bank has flagged the card for suspicious activity and frozen the account. Do you have another form of payment? Marcus didn't have another form of payment. I knew his personal cards were maxed out because Jessica had bought a designer handbag last week. I knew he had less than $50 in his checking account until payday. He would be sweating now. The client, a man who valued success and competence, would be looking at him with raised eyebrows. The illusion of the successful executive would be cracking. I picked up my phone and called Sterling. It is done, I said. Did he call you? Sterling asked. Not yet, I replied. He is probably calling the bank, screaming at some poor customer service representative who can't tell him anything because the account technically doesn't belong to him. What is the next move? Winston. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the ants crawling on the street below. Marcus was one of those ants now. He works for a subsidiary of my holdings, doesn't he? Yes, Sterling confirmed. He is a creative director at OmniAd, which is owned by your venture capital arm. Good, I said. Send a memo to the CEO of OmniAd. Tell him that upper management is not happy with the current performance of the creative team. Tell him we need to see some miracles or heads will roll. Specifically, give Marcus an impossible task. What kind of task? Tell him he has 1 week to land the G Logistics account. I said, a small, cold smile touching my lips. Sterling gasped. But Winston, G Logistics is your flagship company. You are the chairman. Exactly, I said. I want him to come begging to my company for a contract. I want to see him dance. And when he fails, because he will fail, I want him to understand that in the real world you can't just throw people away when you are done with them. I hung up the phone. This was just the beginning. The credit card was a pinch. The job pressure would be a punch. But I wasn't done. I had to teach Jessica a lesson too. She liked status. She liked being the queen of her social circle. It was time to remove her crown. I walked over to the safe in the wall behind my desk. I spun the dial and opened the heavy steel door. Inside there was a stack of files. I pulled out the deed to the house Marcus and Jessica lived in. They thought they owned it because I had let them live there rent-free and they had forged a signature on a transfer document while I was sedated for a dental surgery last month. They thought they were clever. But they forgot one thing. The land the house sat on was owned by a separate trust. A trust that expired. Tomorrow. I ran my finger over the legal document. "You want a yoga studio, Jessica," I whispered. "You are going to have plenty of space to stretch when you are sleeping on a park bench." Suddenly my phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. It was Marcus. He was calling. Not to ask if I was okay. Not to apologize. He was calling because his credit card didn't work. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Then I sent it to voicemail. "You tossed me $10, son," I said to the silent room. "Now you are going to learn what it feels like when $10 is all you have left." The view from my penthouse office on the 45th floor offered a panoramic perspective of Atlanta. From here, the cars looked like toys and the people were invisible specks. It was easy to feel detached, to feel like a god moving pieces on a chessboard. But as I watched the sun reflect off the glass tower of OmniAd, the advertising agency where my son Marcus worked, I didn't feel like a god. I felt like a surgeon preparing to amputate a gangrenous limb to save the patient. The patient was my son's character and the gangrene was his arrogance. I picked up the phone and dialed a private number. It connected instantly to the office of Arthur Henderson, the CEO of OmniAd. Arthur was a good man, a ruthless businessman I had installed in that position 10 years ago. He owed his career to me, though nobody in the building, especially not Marcus, knew that OmniAd was just one small asset in the portfolio of Graves International. "Is he coming in?" I asked, my voice steady. "He is walking down the hallway now," Winston Arthur replied. "He looks confident. He is wearing a new suit. Probably cost $2,000. Break him, Arthur. But give him a lifeline that leads directly back to me." "Understood, sir." I hung up and switched the monitor on my desk to the feed from the hidden camera in Arthur's office. I watched as Marcus strolled in, flashing that charming, practiced smile that had gotten him through life without doing any real work. He sat down without being asked, crossing his legs casually. "Morning." "Arthur Marcus," said his voice oozing a false sense of security. "You wanted to see me. I assume it is about the promotion to senior partner. I have some great ideas for the spring campaign." Arthur didn't smile. He didn't look up from the file he was reading. He let the silence stretch out thick and uncomfortable for a full minute. I saw Marcus shift in his chair. The smile faltered. He uncrossed his legs. Marcus Arthur finally said, closing the file with a heavy thud. "Do you know what this is?" He slid a piece of paper across the mahogany desk. Marcus picked it up. Even on the grainy camera feed, I could see the color drain from his face. It was his performance review. Or rather, the real performance review, not the inflated one his friends in middle management usually gave him. "Your numbers are down, Marcus. Client retention is at an all-time low, and yesterday the corporate credit card assigned to you was declined for a $600 lunch." Marcus stammered. That was a bank error, Arthur. I sorted it out. It was a glitch. It was a warning." Arthur interrupted, his voice cutting like a whip. "We are trimming the fat, Marcus, and right now you are looking very heavy." Marcus stood up, his hands trembling slightly. "You can't fire me. I am the face of this department." "You are the face of mediocrity," Arthur said calmly. "But because you have been here for 5 years, I am going to give you one chance to save your job. Just one." "Anything," Marcus said, desperation creeping into his tone. "I will work nights. I will work weekends. I don't need your time, Marcus. I need a miracle." Arthur leaned forward, his eyes locking onto my son's. "We need to land the G Logistics account." I watched Marcus freeze. G Logistics, the giant of the transportation industry, the company that moved 70% of the freight in the Southeast. Everyone in advertising knew that G Logistics was impossible to court. They were old school. They didn't do flashy commercials. They didn't do social media influencers. They were a fortress of steel and diesel. And they were my company. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched my son process the name. He knew G Logistics. He knew I used to work there as a mechanic. He used to be ashamed of it. He used to tell his friends his dad was in transportation management to hide the fact that I came home with grease under my fingernails every day. He had no idea that while I was fixing engines, I was also signing the checks. He had no idea that the G in G Logistics stood for Graves. That is impossible, Marcus whispered. They have used the same agency for 30 years. They don't take meetings with firms like ours. Then you better be very convincing, Arthur said, leaning back in his chair. You have 1 week, Marcus. Get me a meeting with the board of directors at G Logistics by next Friday or clean out your desk. And Marcus, don't use the company card. It has been canceled. Marcus walked out of the office like a man walking to the gallows. I turned off the monitor. Phase 1 of the workplace squeeze was complete. He was now chasing a ghost, and that ghost was his own father. But the war wasn't just being fought in the boardroom. It was being fought on the home front too. I turned my attention to the other screen, the one linked to the security system of the house Marcus and Jessica lived in. It was mid-morning and Jessica was home as usual. She didn't work. She called herself a lifestyle curator, which meant she spent Marcus's money on things she didn't need to impress people she didn't like. She was sitting at the kitchen island sipping a green smoothie, scrolling through her phone. The doorbell rang. She sighed, annoyed at the interruption, and walked to the door. It was a courier. He handed her a thick cream-colored envelope with a wax seal. It looked important. It looked expensive. Jessica's eyes lit up. She probably thought it was an invitation to a gala or a VIP event. She tore it open in the kitchen. I zoomed in on the camera. It wasn't an invitation. It was a notification from the Gated Communities Management Association. The letterhead was new. Apex Property Management. Jessica read the first line and frowned. She read the second line and her mouth dropped open. She read the third line and she screamed. What she shrieked, slamming the letter down on the granite counter. $3,000. Are they insane? She grabbed her phone and dialed the number on the letterhead. I picked up the receiver on my desk. I wasn't going to speak to her, of course. I had hired a very specific woman for this role. Her name was Brenda, and she had a voice that sounded like grinding gears. Thank you for calling Apex Property Management. How may I direct your call? Brenda said, sitting in the office next to mine. I want to speak to the manager right now, Jessica yelled. I just got this letter. You are raising the monthly community maintenance fee from $500 to $1,500. That is a 300% increase. This is illegal. Actually, ma'am, it is perfectly legal, Brenda replied, her voice sickeningly sweet. The community has been acquired by a new ownership group. We are implementing significant upgrades, new security protocols, upgraded landscaping, and a mandatory infrastructure assessment fee. I don't care about upgrades, Jessica shouted. I am not paying $3,000 a month for you to cut the grass. Who is this new owner? I want to talk to him. I know people in this town. The new owner values his privacy, Brenda said, but the contract is clear. If the fees are not paid by the first of the month, access to the community amenities, including the electronic gate clicker, will be suspended, and liens will be placed on the property. Have a wonderful day. Brenda hung up. Jessica threw her phone across the room. It bounced off the sofa cushions. She stood there hyperventilating. $3,000 a month. That was more than their mortgage payment used to be before I paid it off. I leaned back in my chair. The house they lived in, the one they kicked me out of, was situated in an exclusive enclave called the Highlands. I had bought the management company that ran the Highlands yesterday afternoon. It cost me a small fortune, but seeing Jessica realize that her free ride was over was worth every penny. The rest of the day was a slow burn. I worked on my real business, signing contracts, moving fleets of trucks across the country, but my mind was on the evening. I needed to see them crumble. At 7:00 p.m. Marcus came home. He looked 10 years older than he had this morning. His tie was undone, his hair was messy. He walked into the house expecting a sanctuary, but he walked into a war zone. Jessica was waiting for him, holding the letter. Did you know about this? She demanded, shoving the paper into his chest before he could even put his keys down. Marcus blinked, confused. What? What is this? The HOA fee. It is $3,000 now, Marcus. 3,000. Jessica was pacing back and forth like a caged tiger. I need you to fix this. Call your lawyer. Call someone. We can't afford this. Marcus looked at the letter. Then he laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. You are worried about $3,000, Jess. I might not have a job next week. What? Jessica stopped pacing. Arthur gave me an ultimatum, Marcus said, collapsing onto the sofa. The same sofa I wasn't allowed to sit on because my clothes were too dirty. I have to sign G Logistics in 7 days or I am fired. Do you know who G Logistics is? They are the dinosaurs of the industry. They eat people like me for breakfast. So do something, Jessica yelled, You are a creative director. Create something. I can't just create a relationship with a company that has been closed off for 30 years, Marcus shouted back. This is impossible. It is like the universe is conspiring against us. It's not the universe, Jessica spat. It is that old man. I watched closely. Here it was. The deflection. What are you talking about? Marcus asked. Ever since we kicked Winston out, everything has gone wrong, Jessica said, her eyes narrowing. It is like he cursed us. Or maybe he is the one who is paying for things we didn't know about. Don't be stupid, Marcus snapped. Dad didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. He was a mechanic, Jess. He fixed brakes. He didn't pay HOA fees or influence ad agencies. He is probably sleeping under a bridge right now. But the seed of doubt had been planted. I could see it in Jessica's eyes. She was selfish, but she wasn't entirely stupid. She was starting to realize that the math of their life didn't add up without me. I need a drink, Marcus said, standing up and walking to the liquor cabinet. He reached for the bottle of expensive scotch he kept for special occasions. It was empty. He had finished it last night celebrating my departure. He slammed the cabinet door shut. We need money, Jess, he said quietly. If I lose this job and we have to pay these new fees, we are going to lose the house. We are not losing this house, Jessica hissed. We just renovated the yoga room. Figure it out, Marcus. Go to G Logistics. Beg if you have to. Just get the contract. Marcus stared at his reflection in the dark window. I don't even know who runs G Logistics anymore, he muttered. The CEO is a ghost. No one has seen him in public in years. I smiled in the darkness of my office. He was right. The CEO was a ghost, and that ghost was about to haunt him. I picked up my phone and sent a text message to my secretary. Schedule a meeting for Mr. Marcus Graves at G Logistics headquarters for Friday at 9 a.m. But he doesn't meet with the board. He meets with the founder. I put the phone down. Friday was 3 days away. That gave Marcus 3 days to sweat. 3 days to realize that he was nothing without the foundation I had built for him. And when he walked into that boardroom on Friday, he wouldn't see the feeble old man he threw out into the rain. He would see the man who owned the rain. The silence in my penthouse was absolute, a stark contrast to the noise brewing down in the suburbs. I sat in my leather armchair, a cup of Earl Grey tea steaming on the mahogany desk, watching the monitors that were my window into the life I had left behind. It had been 3 days since Marcus threw me out. 3 days since he tossed $10 at my chest. You would think a son would spend those 3 days frantically calling hospitals, checking morgues, or at the very least driving around the block to see if his father was shivering on a park bench. But Marcus did none of those things. Instead, I watched him pace around the living room, his face illuminated by the blue light of his smartphone. He wasn't looking at missing persons reports. He was looking at the neighborhood Facebook group for the Highlands. I zoomed in on the screen. The neighbors were talking. Mrs. Gable, the nosy woman from across the street who spent her days pruning roses and collecting gossip, had posted a question. Has anyone seen old Mr. Graves? I haven't seen him sitting on the porch in days. I hope he is okay. The weather has been terrible. The comments were piling up. People were asking questions. They were wondering why the nice old man who waved at everyone was suddenly gone. And for Marcus, this wasn't a matter of safety. It was a matter of public relations. He looked up at Jessica, panic tightening the corners of his eyes. They are talking, Jess, he said, his voice tight. Mrs. Gable is asking questions. If word gets out that I kicked my sick father out onto the street, it could ruin me. Arthur Henderson values family values. If I look like a monster, I can kiss the G Logistics promotion goodbye. Jessica didn't look up from her magazine. So lie, she said simply. Tell them he went to visit a relative. Tell them he is in a nursing home. Who cares? They will check. Marcus paced faster. I need to make it look like I care. I need to control the narrative. I watched as a plan formed in his shallow mind. It was a plan so cynical it made my stomach turn. He wasn't going to look for me to bring me home. He was going to look for me to perform the role of the grieving, worried son. He wanted sympathy, not his father. The next morning, Marcus dressed the part. He didn't wear his usual flashy suits. He wore a simple button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, trying to look humble, trying to look like a man of the people. He got into his car, but he didn't head toward the police station. He headed downtown to the gritty underbelly of Atlanta, where the homeless shelters were clustered. I signaled Jerome. Bring the car around, I said. I want to see this in person. We followed him from a safe distance. My tinted windows shielded me as Marcus pulled his luxury sedan up to the curb in front of the Last Hope shelter. This was a place I knew well, not because I had stayed there, but because I had funded it. The new roof, the industrial kitchen, the heating system, all of it was paid for by the Graves Foundation. Marcus stepped out of his car. He locked it twice, looking around nervously as if the very air of the poverty-stricken street might scratch his paint job. He took a deep breath, composed his face into a mask of tragic concern, and pulled out his phone. He didn't walk inside immediately. First, he stood in front of the peeling paint of the shelter sign. He held his phone up, finding the perfect angle where the light hit his worried brow just right. He snapped a selfie, then another. Then he spent 2 minutes typing a caption. I checked his social media feed on my tablet. The post appeared instantly. A picture of Marcus looking sad in front of the homeless shelter. The caption read, "Searching everywhere for my dad. Dementia is a cruel disease. If anyone has seen him, please pray for us. My heart is breaking. #LostFather, #FamilyFirst." I let out a bitter laugh that startled Jerome in the front seat. Dementia. He was diagnosing me with a disease I didn't have to explain why I had run away. It was brilliant in a sick, twisted way. Marcus finally walked inside. The shelter was busy. Men and women down on their luck were lining up for lunch. The smell of bleach and boiled cabbage hung in the air. Marcus wrinkled his nose, pulling a silk handkerchief from his pocket to cover his mouth, his eyes darting around with undisguised disgust. He approached the front desk. A volunteer was sorting mail. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice loud, demanding attention. "I am looking for my father." He wandered off. He held up a photo of me. It was an old photo, one where I looked tired and worn out, taken after a long shift at the garage years ago. The volunteer looked at the photo, then at Marcus's expensive watch, then back at the photo. "I haven't seen him," she said. "But you can check the dining hall." Marcus walked into the dining hall like he was entering a contagious ward. He scanned the faces of the men eating soup. He wasn't really looking. He was just going through the motions. He walked up to an old man who was hunched over a bowl of chili. "Dad," Marcus asked loudly, making sure everyone heard him. The man looked up. He wasn't me. He had a beard and blue eyes. "Oh, sorry," Marcus said, not sounding sorry at all. He turned to the room, raising his voice. "I am looking for Winston Graves. He is old, confused, probably talking nonsense. Has anyone seen him?" Silence. The men and women looked at him with hollow, tired eyes. They knew a tourist when they saw one. Suddenly, a door at the back of the hall opened. A tall man with graying hair and a posture like a steel beam walked out. It was Elias Vance, the director of the shelter. Elias and I had served in the same unit in Vietnam. He was one of the 3 people on Earth who knew exactly how much money I had. Elias walked straight up to Marcus. He didn't smile. "Can I help you, son?" Elias asked, his voice booming. "I am Marcus Graves," my son announced, puffing out his chest. "I am looking for my father, Winston. He is missing. I have been checking all the lower-class establishments." Elias narrowed his eyes. He looked Marcus up and down, analyzing him like a threat. "I know Winston," Elias said calmly. Marcus's eyes lit up. "You do? Is he here? Is he sleeping in one of the bunks? Can I take a picture? Can I see him?" He was already reaching for his phone, imagining the likes he would get on a photo of their tearful reunion in a homeless shelter. "He is not here," Elias said, crossing his heavy arms. "Then where is he?" Marcus demanded. "Did you kick him out? He is a sick old man." Elias stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space. The air crackled with tension. I watched from the car, gripping the door handle, wishing I could hear every word. Thankfully, I had bugged the shelter years ago for security purposes. The audio feed was crystal clear in my earpiece. "Your father isn't sleeping in a bunk," Marcus Elias said, his voice low and gritty. "And he isn't sick. I spoke to him this morning." Marcus blinked, confused. "You spoke to him? What was he saying? Was he asking for money? Look if he owes you for a bed here." Marcus pulled out his wallet and fished out a $20 bill, holding it out with 2 fingers like it was contaminated. Elias looked at the money and laughed. It was a deep belly laugh that echoed off the concrete walls. He didn't take the bill. He just looked at Marcus with a pity that was far more insulting than anger. "Keep your money, boy," Elias said. "You are going to need it more than he does." "What is that supposed to mean?" Marcus snapped, his face flushing red. "My father is a broke mechanic. He has nothing." Elias leaned in his face, inches from Marcus. "That old man you threw away, he is living better than you are right now. He is eating food you can't pronounce and sleeping in a bed that costs more than your car." Marcus stared at him for a second. Then he scoffed. A sneer curled his lip. He rolled his eyes. "Okay, I get it," Marcus said, putting his wallet away. "He is in a better place mentally. He is with God. Or maybe you are just as crazy as he is, living better than me. Please. I wear Armani." "He is not with God," Elias said, his eyes hard as flint. "He is in Atlanta. And he is watching." Marcus laughed again, shaking his head. "Right. Watching. Sure. Look, if he shows up, tell him his son came looking. Tell him I tried. That is all that matters." Marcus turned on his heel and walked out. He didn't look back at the hungry men. He didn't thank Elias. He walked out the door, pulled out a bottle of hand sanitizer, and scrubbed his hands furiously as he walked to his car. I watched him get in and drive away. He thought Elias was speaking in metaphors. He thought living better meant spiritual peace. He was so blinded by his own arrogance that he couldn't imagine a reality where his father wasn't beneath him. Inside the shelter, Elias looked up at the security camera in the corner of the room. He knew I was watching. He gave a small, sharp salute. I tapped the screen, returning the salute in spirit. "Jerome," I said, leaning back in the seat. "Take me to the office. My son wants to control the narrative." "Fine. Let's give him a story he will never forget." As we drove away, I looked at the social media post Marcus had made. It already had 50 likes. 50 people fooled by a filter and a lie. But likes don't pay the bills. And likes certainly don't sign contracts with G Logistics. Marcus had checked "Find Dad" off his to-do list. He thought he was safe. He thought he had handled the optics. He had no idea that while he was taking selfies, I was rewriting his future. The car merged onto the highway, heading toward the glass tower of Graves International. It was time for the next lesson. Marcus wanted to play the big shot executive good. It was time to see if he could swim with the sharks without his father's life jacket. Because tomorrow, the real pressure would begin. Tomorrow, the ghost of the CEO would make his first move. And Marcus Graves was about to learn that in my world, you don't get participation trophies for showing up. You either win or you lose everything. The morning sun sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I sat in my leather chair, my hands resting on the cold glass of my desk. Beside me stood Arthur Sterling. If I was the architect of my son's destruction, Sterling was the demolition expert. He was a man of few words and even fewer emotions. He was 6 feet 2 inches of cold, hard logic wrapped in a $5,000 Italian suit. His hair was silver, perfectly coiffed, and his eyes were the color of a frozen lake. Sterling was not a family lawyer. He was a corporate shark. He specialized in hostile takeovers and crushing litigation. Sending him to visit my son was like sending a tank to settle a parking dispute. "Do you have the papers, Sterling?" I asked, my voice raspy from a sleepless night. Sterling placed a thick leather portfolio on my desk. He opened it with surgical precision. Inside lay a single document. It was printed on heavy cream-colored bond paper. It looked elegant. It looked official. It looked like a peace treaty. But it was a declaration of war. The document is titled "Voluntary Severance of Familial and Legal Obligations." Sterling said, his voice smooth and devoid of warmth. "It is airtight, Winston. If he signs this, he is cutting his own throat." I ran my finger over the text. Clause 4, Section B. The print was small. It was dense legalese. It stated that the signatory Marcus Graves irrevocably waived all rights to any future claims against the estate of Winston Graves. It also stated that he surrendered any interest in assets currently held in trust or used as collateral for personal debts. That meant the house. That meant the credit lines. That meant the inheritance. "He won't read it," I said quietly. "He never reads anything. He thinks details are for poor people." Sterling closed the portfolio. "Then I shall go and collect his signature." I watched on the monitors as Sterling's black Mercedes sedan pulled up to the curb of the house in the Highlands. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. Marcus would be getting ready for work, stressed about the G Logistics deadline. Jessica would be drinking her third coffee, probably looking for new ways to spend money she didn't have. Sterling stepped out of the car. He didn't look at the house with judgment. He looked at it like an appraiser looking at a property that was about to be foreclosed. He adjusted his silk tie and rang the doorbell. I turned up the volume on the surveillance feed. Jessica answered the door. She was wearing a silk robe, her hair in a messy bun. She looked annoyed, ready to yell at a solicitor or a delivery driver. But when she saw Sterling, her expression changed. She saw the suit. She saw the expensive briefcase. She smelled the power. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice instantly taking on a sugary, fake tone. "Mrs. Graves," Sterling said, dipping his head slightly. "My name is Arthur Sterling. I am the legal representative for Mr. Winston Graves." Jessica's eyes widened. She stepped back, clutching her robe. "Is he dead? Did something happen?" "May I come in?" Sterling asked. "This matter requires discretion." Jessica ushered him into the living room. "Marcus," she yelled up the stairs. "Marcus, get down here. The old man's lawyer is here." Marcus came running down the stairs, hopping on one foot as he tried to put on his shoe. He looked disheveled. The stress of the last few days was eating him alive. When he saw Sterling standing in his living room, looking like a statue of judgment, he froze. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, tucking his shirt in. "Mr. Sterling," Jessica answered for him. "He represents your father." Marcus's face went pale. "Did you find him? Is he suing us?" Sterling placed the briefcase on the coffee table. He didn't sit down. He stood tall, dominating the room. "Mr. Graves is safe," Sterling said calmly. "He has retained my firm to handle his affairs moving forward. He has expressed a desire to simplify his life." "Simplify?" Marcus asked, narrowing his eyes. "What does that mean?" "It means," Sterling continued, his voice steady, "that your father accepts your decision to remove him from this residence. He understands that he is, as you put it, a burden." I watched Marcus flinch. He looked at Jessica. Jessica just crossed her arms, listening intently. "He wants to make the separation official," Sterling said. "He does not want to be a drain on your resources any longer. He wishes to absolve you of any legal responsibility for his care, his medical bills, and his debts." Jessica gasped. A smile broke across her face like a crack in a dam. "Wait. You mean we wouldn't have to pay for nursing homes? We wouldn't be liable if he gets sick?" "Correct," Sterling said. "If Marcus signs this agreement, Winston Graves becomes a stranger to you in the eyes of the law. You will owe him nothing. No support, no housing, no money." Jessica clapped her hands together. "Oh my God, Marcus. This is amazing. This is exactly what we wanted." Marcus looked skeptical. He looked at the leather portfolio. But what does he get out of it? Why would he just let us off the hook? Sterling looked Marcus dead in the eye. "Because he believes he has caused you enough trouble. He wants you to be free, Marcus, to live your life without his shadow hanging over you." It was the perfect lie. It played right into Marcus's ego. He wanted to believe that he was the victim, that I was the one ruining his life. Sterling opened the portfolio and slid the document across the glass table. He produced a gold Mont Blanc fountain pen and laid it next to the paper. "Sign here," Sterling said, pointing to the line at the bottom, "and we can all move on." Marcus picked up the pen. It was heavy. He turned it over in his fingers. He looked at the document. It was 3 pages long. Should I read it?" Marcus asked, hesitating. Jessica rolled her eyes. "Marcus, don't be an idiot. Just sign it. Do you want to be stuck paying for his heart surgery next year? Do you want the state coming after us for elder care? He is giving us a get-out-of-jail-free card." "But," Marcus looked at the dense text. "Mr. Graves," Sterling said, checking his watch, "I have a meeting with the partners at G Logistics in an hour. I cannot wait all day." The mention of G Logistics was a masterstroke. I had told Sterling to drop that name. Marcus's head snapped up. "You know G Logistics?" Marcus asked. Sterling nodded. "They are one of our firm's largest clients." Marcus looked at the pen, then at Sterling. "If I sign this, do you think you could put in a good word for me? I am trying to get a meeting with them." Sterling didn't smile. He didn't lie. He just said, "I observe who is cooperative and who is difficult, Mr. Graves." I remember names. That was all Marcus needed to hear. He thought he was making a strategic business move. He thought he was charming the gatekeeper. "Okay," Marcus said. "Let's do it." He bent down. He didn't turn the page. He didn't look at Clause 4, Section B. He didn't see the words "surrender of beneficial interest in the trust holding the property at 42 Highland Drive." He didn't see the words "forfeiture of rights to the Graves Family Collateral Fund." He just saw a way out of guilt and a way into a business deal. The pen scratched against the paper. It was a loud, harsh sound in the quiet room. "Signed, Marcus Graves." He stood up and handed the pen back to Sterling. "There, done. Tell him I wish him luck." Sterling took the document. He blew on the ink to dry it, then he placed it back in the portfolio and snapped the lock shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "I will convey your message," Sterling said. He turned to leave. "Wait," Jessica called out. "So, does this mean he is never coming back?" "He will not be returning to this house," Mrs. Graves Sterling said. "That I can promise you." Sterling walked out the door. He walked to his car, got in, and drove away. Inside the house, Marcus and Jessica hugged each other. "We did it," Jessica squealed. "We are free. No more old man smell, no more bills. We can finally live our lives." Marcus was smiling, but he looked at his hand, the one that had just signed the paper. It was shaking slightly. "Yeah," he said, "we are free." I sat in my office watching them celebrate. I took a sip of my cold tea. "You are free, all right," I whispered at the screen. "You are free of the house you are standing in. You are free of the car in your driveway. You are free of the inheritance that would have made you a king." I picked up my phone and called Sterling. "Did he read it?" I asked. "Not a single word," Sterling replied. "File it," I said. "File it with the county clerk immediately." And Sterling, "Yes, sir, trigger the foreclosure clause on the trust. But give it 48 hours. Let him have his meeting at G Logistics first. I want him to think he has won the world right before the floor drops out from under him." "Understood, Winston." I hung up. The legal bond between father and son was broken. Marcus had signed it away for the promise of saving a few $1,000s. He had traded a diamond for a piece of glass. Now there was nothing holding me back. No legal obligation to protect him. No parental duty to shelter him. He was just a man who owed a debt to a very powerful entity. And that entity was coming to collect. The next few days would be a masterclass in pain. Marcus thought his biggest problem was landing a client. He didn't know that by the time Friday arrived, he wouldn't even have a bed to sleep in. I turned off the monitor. I needed to prepare for the meeting on Friday. I needed to decide which suit to wear when I introduced myself to my son, not as his father, but as the chairman of the board. The headquarters of G Logistics was not just a building. It was a fortress of steel and glass that pierced the Atlanta skyline, a physical testament to 50 years of sweat, grit, and ruthless negotiation. I had built this place from a single rusted delivery truck into a multi-billion-dollar empire. Every rivet in the beams, every tile on the floor represented a sacrifice I had made. And now my son was walking into my temple thinking he could conquer it with a smile and a glossy brochure. I sat in the executive observation suite on the top floor. The room was dark, illuminated only by the bank of high-definition monitors on the wall and the city lights outside. A pane of one-way glass, thick and bulletproof, separated me from the main boardroom, but right now, my attention was focused on the security feed from the lobby. I reached for my porcelain teacup. My hand trembled violently, the Parkinson's flaring up from the stress and the storm of emotions swirling inside me. The cup rattled against the saucer, a tiny china bone sound in the silent room. I had to use both hands to steady it, lifting the warm Earl Grey to my lips. I took a sip, letting the heat settle my stomach, but my eyes never left the screen. There he was, Marcus. He strode through the revolving doors with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. He was wearing his best suit, a navy blue custom fit that probably cost more than my first 3 cars combined. He carried a leather portfolio under his arm, clutching it like a weapon. He checked his reflection in the polished brass of a pillar, smoothing his hair. He looked the part. He looked like a winner. But I knew the truth. Inside that expensive suit was a terrified little boy who was about to learn that the real world didn't care about his last name or his charm. He approached the main reception desk. Sitting there was Mrs. Gable. Not the gossip from his neighborhood, but Eleanor Gable, the head of front desk security. She was a woman I had hired 30 years ago. She had eyes like a hawk and the demeanor of a tank commander. She knew exactly who Marcus was. I had briefed her personally. I turned up the volume on the console. "Good morning," Marcus said, leaning his elbow on the high marble counter, flashing his bright white teeth. "I am Marcus Graves from OmniAd. I have a meeting regarding the new marketing initiative." Eleanor didn't smile. She didn't look up from her computer screen for a full 10 seconds. When she finally did, she adjusted her glasses and looked at him with a flat, unimpressed stare. "I show no appointment for a Mr. Graves in the system," she said, her voice crisp and professional. Marcus chuckled a nervous sound. "Oh, there must be a mistake. My agency was sent here by... Well, let's just say I have connections with the ownership. I need to speak with the CEO immediately." It is urgent. The CEO is not available, Eleanor said, returning her attention to her typing. And the ownership does not take walk-in appointments from solicitous vendors. Marcus's smile faltered. He leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Look, I am not just a vendor. I am family. Well, sort of. I know Arthur Sterling. He told me to come. Mr. Sterling is external legal counsel, Eleanor replied without missing a beat. He does not set the schedule for the executive board. If you do not have an appointment, I must ask you to leave. Marcus slammed his hand on the counter. The sound echoed in the cavernous lobby. People turned to look. Security guards posted by the elevator shifted their stance, their hands hovering near their belts. Do you know who I am? Marcus hissed, his face turning a blotchy red. I am a creative director. I have a portfolio here that will change the face of this dinosaur company. You are making a mistake. Just look at it. He ripped the zipper of his portfolio open and pulled out a stack of concept art. He shoved them across the marble counter. They were flashy, colorful ads featuring young models posing next to trucks. They were completely wrong for the brand. They lacked soul. They lacked the grit of the road. Eleanor looked at the papers. She picked one up with 2 fingers as if it were a soiled tissue. She looked at it for a moment, then dropped it back onto the pile. This is amateur work, Mr. Graves, she said, her voice cutting through him like a razor. G Logistics moves the economy of this country. We do not need cartoons. I watched Marcus recoil as if he had been slapped. Amateur. The word hung in the air. For a man whose entire identity was built on being the creative genius, this was a dagger to the heart. Listen to me, you glorified secretary, Marcus shouted, losing all composure. I am not leaving until I see someone in charge. I am not losing my job because of some gatekeeper. Call the CEO. Tell him Marcus Graves is here. Eleanor pressed a silent button under the desk. I watched from my tower, my heart aching with a strange mixture of pity and necessary cruelty. He was screaming for the CEO. He was screaming for me. He was standing in the lobby of the building I built, demanding to see the father he had thrown out into the rain. 2 large security officers materialized behind Marcus. They were big men, former military dressed in black suits. Sir, the first officer said, placing a heavy hand on Marcus's shoulder, you are causing a disturbance. You need to leave. Get your hands off me, Marcus yelled, trying to shrug him off. I have rights. I am a Graves. That name means nothing here if you don't earn it, I whispered to the empty room, my voice trembling just like my hands. The officers didn't argue. They grabbed him. One took his left arm, the other took his right. They lifted him off his feet with practiced ease. Marcus kicked and thrashed his expensive Italian loafers, scuffing the polished floor. His portfolio fell, scattering his amateur drawings across the lobby like confetti. You will regret this, Marcus screamed as they dragged him toward the revolving doors. Do you hear me? I will sue this entire building. They tossed him out onto the sidewalk. He stumbled, falling onto his hands and knees. Passers-by stopped to look. A few pulled out their phones to record the man in the expensive suit being thrown out of G Logistics. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking. I set the teacup down. The tea was cold. I felt no triumph. There is no victory in watching your child fail. But there is necessity. He had to be broken down to his foundation before he could be rebuilt. He had to learn that the name Graves wasn't a pass to skip the line. It was a responsibility to lead the line. I switched the monitor view. I needed to see the aftermath. An hour later, Marcus stormed into his house. He kicked the front door shut so hard the frame rattled. He looked like a man possessed. His hair was wild. His suit jacket was torn at the shoulder seam, and his eyes were wide with a frantic, animalistic panic. Jessica was in the living room, surrounded by fabric swatches for her new yoga studio. She looked up, annoyed by the noise. God, Marcus, what is wrong with you? She asked. You are tracking dirt on the rug. Marcus marched over to the coffee table and swept the fabric swatches onto the floor with a violent sweep of his arm. It is over, he screamed. It is all over. They threw me out, Jess. They literally threw me out on the street. Jessica stood up, her face twisting in anger. Who threw you out? G Logistics. Yes, the receptionist. The guards. Everyone. They treated me like I was garbage. Marcus paced the room, running his hands through his hair. They didn't even look at my portfolio. They called it amateur work. I have 1 week, Jess. 1 week, and then Arthur fires me. And then we have nothing. No salary, no bonus. And with the new HOA fees, we are going to lose the house. He collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. He started to sob. It wasn't the cry of a man in grief. It was the cry of a spoiled child who had lost his toy. Jessica stared at him. She didn't offer comfort. She didn't sit beside him. She looked at him with disdain. "Stop crying, you look pathetic," she spat. She walked over to the window and looked out at the street, her arms crossed tight across her chest. "It is him," she said, her voice low and venomous. "Who?" Marcus mumbled through his hands. "Your father," Jessica hissed, spinning around. "Ever since we kicked that old man out, the universe has turned against us. He is like a black cat that crossed our path. He brought this bad luck into our lives." Marcus looked up, his eyes red. "Don't be crazy. Dad has nothing to do with this. He is gone." "Is he?" Jessica countered. "Look at the timing, Marcus. The credit cards, the HOA fees. Now this job disaster. It is like his misery is haunting us. He is probably out there somewhere cursing us, wishing us to fail so he can feel better about his pathetic life." She walked over to the spot where Marcus had thrown his portfolio. She kicked it. "It is his fault," she declared. "If he hadn't been such a burden for so long, we would have saved more money. We would be secure. But no, we spent years taking care of him, and now his bad energy is lingering in this house like a sickness." Marcus sat up slowly. He wiped his face. He wanted to believe her. It was so much easier to blame a ghost than to look in the mirror. "You might be right," Marcus said, his voice weak. "He always did have that way of looking at me. Like I wasn't good enough. Maybe he jinxed me." Jessica nodded, seizing on the excuse. "Exactly. He is punishing us for finally putting ourselves first." "Well, I won't let him win. We need to fight back, Marcus. You need to go back to that office tomorrow. You need to find a way in. Don't let that old man's bad luck destroy my future." I watched them from my penthouse, shaking my head. They were incredible. Even when the walls were crumbling around them, they refused to hold the hammer. They blamed the wind. They blamed the rain. They blamed the old man they had discarded. I reached for the phone. I had to make a call to Arthur at Omniad. Marcus was going to try again tomorrow, and I needed to make sure the next door he opened led him further into the maze I had constructed. He thought it was bad luck. He thought it was a curse. He had no idea that the curse was simply the consequences of his own actions finally coming home to roost. The collateral damage of war is always the innocent. That is the hardest truth I have had to accept in my 73 years of life. When you decide to bring down a house to kill the rats inside, you have to make sure the things you love do not get crushed in the rubble. For 3 days, I had been systematically destroying my son's financial life. I had cut his credit. I had threatened his job. I had taken away his safety net. But on Thursday night, the war came home in a way I had not anticipated. It struck the only person in that house who was blameless, my grandson Leo. I was sitting in my study, the lights dimmed, reviewing the quarterly earnings for Graves International. The numbers were good, the empire was strong. But my eyes kept drifting to the third monitor on the wall, the one broadcasting the live feed from the nursery in Marcus's house. Leo was 6 years old. He had my eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. He was a sweet boy, obsessed with dinosaurs and space rockets. He was the only person in that family who hugged me without checking my wallet first. On the screen, I saw Leo tossing and turning in his bed. He threw off his covers. He was sweating. Even through the grainy black and white night vision, I could see his small chest heaving. He sat up and started to cough. It was a dry, barking sound that rattled his small frame. "Mommy," he cried out, his voice thin and weak. "Daddy, I hurt." My hand gripped the armrest of my chair. The grandfather in me wanted to rush out the door, drive to the house, and scoop him up. I wanted to put a cool cloth on his forehead and sing him the old blues songs I used to sing to Marcus. But the general in me stayed seated. I had to wait. I had to see if his parents were capable of doing the one job that mattered more than status or money. Parenting. The door to the nursery flew open. It wasn't Jessica. It was Marcus. He looked exhausted, still wearing his work trousers from the disastrous day at the office. He rushed to the bed and felt Leo's forehead. "You are burning up, buddy," Marcus said, panic rising in his voice. Jessica. Wake up." Jessica appeared a moment later, rubbing sleep from her eyes, looking annoyed rather than concerned. "What is it now?" she asked. "I have a facial appointment at 8 in the morning. I need my rest." He has a fever, Jess, a high one, and he is having trouble breathing. Jessica walked over, touched Leo's arm, and pulled back as if she had been burned. Oh God, he is soaking wet. It's probably that flu going around his private school. I told you we should have kept him home this week. We need to take him to the hospital, Marcus said, picking Leo up. He felt heavy and limp in his arms. Not the city hospital, Jessica snapped, fully awake now. I am not sitting in a waiting room with homeless people and drug addicts. We are taking him to St. Jude's Medical Center, the private wing. That is expensive, Jess. Marcus hesitated. We have insurance. Jessica rolled her eyes. The best insurance. Your dad, someone pays for it. Just go. I watched them rush out of the house. I picked up my secure phone. I dialed the number of Dr. Harrison, the chief of medicine at St. Jude's. He was an old golf buddy of mine. Winston Harrison answered, his voice groggy. It is 2 a.m. My grandson is coming in. I said, my voice steady but urgent. High fever. Respiratory distress. I want him treated like a Prince Harrison. Best doctors. Private room. Consider it done, Harrison said. I will head in myself. But Harrison, I added, stopping him before he hung up. The billing. That is important. Send it to your private account as usual. No, I said. Not this time. When they present the insurance card, decline it. There was a silence on the line. Winston, are you sure decline it? I repeated. Make them pay out of pocket. Every single cent. I hung up. It felt like I had swallowed broken glass. But Marcus needed to learn that safety costs money. He needed to learn that the magical shield that had protected his family for years wasn't woven from good luck. It was woven from my bank account. I switched the feed to the security cameras I had hacked into at the hospital admission desk. 20 minutes later, Marcus and Jessica burst in. Leo was wrapped in a blanket, looking pale and frightened. The lobby of St. Jude's looked more like a 5-star hotel than a hospital. There were marble floors, soft classical music, and a receptionist who looked like a model. My son is sick, Marcus said, breathless. We need a room. Of course, sir, the receptionist said calmly. Name Leo Graves, she typed into her computer. I see him here. And may I have your insurance card? Marcus fumbled in his wallet. He pulled out a gold-colored card. It was the card I had given him 5 years ago. He slapped it on the counter with an air of authority. Here, it is the Platinum Family Plan. Full coverage, no deductible. The receptionist took the card. She swiped it through the reader. She frowned. She swiped it again. Then she typed something. I am sorry, Mr. Graves, she said, sliding the card back to him. This policy is inactive. What? Marcus stared at her. That is impossible. That card is good until 2028. Look at the expiration date. The physical card is valid, sir, but the policy itself was canceled 3 days ago by the primary policy holder. Jessica stepped forward, her face turning red. Who is the primary policy holder? My husband is the father. The screen says the policy is owned by Mr. Winston Graves, the receptionist said, and he removed all beneficiaries effective Tuesday morning. The silence that fell over them was deafening. Jessica looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the card. For the first time, the reality of what he had signed with Sterling began to sink in. He remembered the document, the one he didn't read, the one that severed all ties. He thought it just meant he didn't have to pay for my nursing home. He didn't realize it meant I stopped paying for his life. He canceled his own grandson's insurance. Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. He is a monster, Jessica screamed, slamming her hand on the counter. He is trying to kill us. He knew Leo gets sick in the winter. How could he do this? I sat in my penthouse watching them. I wasn't a monster. I had just ensured the best doctor in the state was scrubbing up to treat the boy, but I wasn't going to pay the premium for ungrateful children anymore. We can sort this out later, Marcus said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Just admit him. We will pay cash. Very well, the receptionist said. For emergency admission to the private wing without insurance, we require a deposit up front. How much? Marcus asked, reaching for his debit card. $5,000, she said. Marcus froze. His hand hovered over his wallet. $5,000. I knew exactly how much was in his bank account because I still had administrative access to view it. He had $6,200. This deposit would wipe him out. It would leave him with barely enough to buy groceries for the month. $5,000, Jessica gasped. That is robbery. It is the standard rate for uninsured patients in the VIP wing, ma'am, the receptionist said coldly. Or you can take him to the county hospital downtown. The wait time there is currently 6 hours. Marcus looked down at Leo. The boy whimpered, clutching his father's shirt. Daddy, I want to go home. Marcus closed his eyes. He pulled out his debit card. Do it, he said softly. He swiped the card. He punched in his PIN. He watched the machine process. Approved. He stared at the receipt as it printed out. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the death warrant of his financial freedom. They took Leo back to a room. I switched feeds to watch Dr. Harrison treat him. Within an hour, Leo was on an IV, his fever breaking, sleeping peacefully in a bed with high thread count sheets. He was safe. But in the waiting room, the storm was just beginning. Marcus sat with his head in his hands. Jessica was pacing back and forth, her heels clicking aggressively on the floor. $5,000, Marcus, she hissed. That was our vacation money. That was the money for the new furniture. Gone. Just like that. It was for our son Jess. Marcus said, not looking up. What choice did I have? You should have checked the insurance, Jessica yelled. You are the man of the house. How did you not know your father was paying for it? Marcus looked up then. His eyes were haunted. I didn't know because I never asked, he said quietly. I assumed my company paid for it. Or that it was part of some package. I never looked at the statements, Jess. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Do you realize what this means? He asked. What? That your father is a psychopath? Jessica spat. No, Marcus said. It means he was paying for everything. The insurance was $800 a month. The HOA fee was $3,000. The cell phone bills. I checked them while we were waiting. They are in his name. The car insurance on your Range Rover. In his name. He turned to face her. We thought we were rich, Jess. We thought we were successful, but we were just allowance kids. He was subsidizing our entire lives, and we threw him out like garbage. Jessica stopped pacing. She crossed her arms, refusing to accept the blame. So what she said defensively. He owed us that. He is the parent. It is his job to provide. He is 73 years old, Marcus shouted, causing a nurse to look over from the station. He doesn't owe us anything. And now he is showing us exactly how much we cost. Marcus pulled out his phone. He opened his banking app. We have $1,200 left, Jess. That is it. If I don't get that contract with G Logistics, if I lose my job next week, we won't be able to pay the mortgage. We won't be able to buy food. Jessica's face paled. But we have savings, right? The investment account. Marcus laughed. A bitter, broken sound. The investment account was a trust, Jess. The one I signed away yesterday. I thought I was signing away my liability for his debts. But I was signing away his liability for mine. He sank back into the chair. We are broke. We are completely, utterly broke. I turned off the monitor. The lesson was harsh, but it was sinking in. For the first time in his life, Marcus was doing the math. He was realizing that the $10 he threw at me wasn't an insult to my poverty. It was an insult to the vast, invisible umbrella I had held over his head for 30 years. He was beginning to understand the value of $1, and more importantly, the value of the man who earned it. But he wasn't there yet. He still had his pride. He still had his job, or so he thought. And he still had Jessica whispering poison in his ear. The final blow hadn't landed yet. Friday was coming. The meeting at G Logistics was coming. And I had one more secret to reveal. I picked up my tea. It was still warm. I toasted the empty room. Sleep well, Leo, I whispered. Grandpa has you covered. But your father, he has a long road ahead of him. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep well. I dreamed of the rain. I dreamed of the look on Marcus's face when he realized that the check for the hospital didn't just buy medicine. It bought him a ticket to the real world. A world where actions have consequences and where the bank of Dad is permanently closed. The hospital bill for Leo had been a wake-up call that my son chose to ignore. Instead of hearing the alarm, he simply tried to smash the clock. I sat in my darkened office, the only light coming from the amber glow of a single desk lamp and the flicker of the financial spreadsheets on my monitor. My hands were steady, for once the tremor held at bay by a cold, clinical focus. I was watching the digital footprint of a man drowning in his own vanity. Marcus had always been a sprinter, never a long-distance runner. He wanted the glory of the finish line without the sweat of the miles. And now with his bank account gasping for air, he was about to make a choice that would define the rest of his life. I accessed the back-end server of OmniAd. Because I owned the holding company that owned the agency, I had a master key to every transaction, every memo, and every expense report. I saw the movement of money in real time. Marcus was desperate. The $5,000 deposit for the hospital had left him with less than $1,000 to his name. But Jessica didn't care about the math. On the security feed from their home, I watched her walk into the kitchen carrying a large, glossy shopping bag from a high-end boutique on Peachtree Street. Marcus looked up from his laptop, his eyes bloodshot and rimmed with dark circles. "Jess, what is that?" he asked, his voice cracking. "We discussed this. We are on a strict budget until I land the G Logistics deal." "It was on sale, Marcus," she said, her voice airy and dismissive as she pulled out a quilted leather handbag that probably cost 3 months of mortgage payments. "A woman in my position has to maintain appearances. If I look poor, people will think you are failing. It is an investment in your career." Marcus put his head in his hands. "An investment? Jess, the HOA fee is due on Monday. $3,000. We don't have it. I am using my personal savings just to keep the lights on. Then find the money." She snapped, her tone turning sharp and predatory. "You are a creative director. Use your resources. Everyone else at your level has a side hustle or an expense account. Don't be so moralistic when our lifestyle is on the line." She walked out of the room, leaving the price tag on the counter like a taunt. I watched Marcus stare at that tag. I saw the gears turning in his head. He looked at his work laptop. He looked at the corporate portal for vendor payments. This was the moment. The crossroads. I leaned back in my chair, sipping a glass of ice water. I could have stopped him. I could have sent an anonymous email to his boss. I could have had Sterling call him with a stern warning. But I stayed my hand. There is a specific kind of wisdom that only comes from hitting the bottom, and Marcus had spent his whole life floating on my clouds. He needed to feel the gravity. My philosophy was simple. I didn't push my son toward the cliff. I just unbuckled his seatbelt and let him drive. If he wanted to go over the edge, that was his choice to make. On the screen, I watched Marcus log into the OmniAd accounting system. His fingers hovered over the keys. He was looking at a dormant account for a printing company we hadn't used in 2 years. It was a small, quiet corner of the budget. He began to type. He created a fake invoice for $5,800 for promotional materials that didn't exist. He routed the payment not to a business account but to a new digital wallet he had set up an hour ago. I watched the progress bar as the internal approval went through. Because he was a director, he had the authority to sign off on anything under $6,000 without a second signature. He knew the system. He knew the loopholes. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was outsmarting the world. The transaction cleared. I saw the notification on my monitor. Marcus Graves had officially become a thief. He didn't look relieved. He looked sick. He stood up and went to the bathroom, and I could hear him gagging over the sink. He still had a conscience, but it was losing the war against his cowardice. He came back out, wiped his face, and immediately transferred the money to his personal checking account. He paid the HOA fee. He paid the credit card bill for Jessica's bag. He bought himself another week of the lie. I picked up my phone and called David, my head of internal audit. Sir David said, "We just flagged a suspicious manual override at OmniAd. It is Marcus." I know I said, my voice like dry parchment. "Do you want me to lock the account and alert the authorities?" "No," I said. "I want you to create a shadow file, document every penny, every timestamp, every IP address, but let the funds stay in his account." David hesitated. "Sir, if we let him continue, he might take more. He is already looking at a larger vendor contract for the G Logistics pitch." "Let him," I said. "Give him enough rope to build a ladder or a noose. It is up to him which one he uses." I hung up and turned back to the monitor. Marcus was now back at his desk working on the G Logistics presentation with a frantic, manic energy. He thought the stolen money had bought him peace of mind. He thought he had solved the problem, but all he had done was trade a financial crisis for a criminal one. He was no longer just an ungrateful son. He was a liability to the empire I had spent 50 years protecting. As a father, my heart felt like it was being squeezed by a cold hand. I remembered the little boy who used to sit on the floor of my garage handing me wrenches and asking how the engines worked. I remembered the pride in his eyes when I told him he was smart. Where did that boy go? How did he turn into this man who would steal from his own family's legacy to pay for a leather handbag? The answer was painful. I had sheltered him too much. I had given him the fruit without teaching him how to plant the tree. By making his life easy, I had made his character soft, and soft things break when the pressure gets high. I watched Jessica come back into the room. She saw Marcus working and smiled, draped her arms around his neck. "Did you fix it?" she whispered. "It is handled," Marcus said, his voice flat. "Just don't ask any more questions, Jess." She kissed his cheek and went back to her magazine. She didn't care how the magic happened as long as the lights stayed on. She was the enabler, the fuel for his fire, and she would be the first one to run when the smoke got too thick. I looked at the clock. It was nearly midnight. Tomorrow was the final day before the G Logistics meeting. Marcus was planning to use the stolen funds to hire an outside firm to polish his presentation, trying to cheat his way into a contract he didn't deserve. He was doubling down on the deception. I got up from my desk and walked to the window. The city of Atlanta stretched out before me, a sea of lights. Somewhere out there, my son was celebrating a victory that was actually a defeat. He thought he was winning the game, but he didn't realize I owned the board, the pieces, and the room we were playing in. He had taken the bait. He had chosen the path of least resistance. Now all I had to do was wait for the meeting on Friday. He would walk in expecting a promotion and a paycheck. He would walk in thinking he had saved his life. But he would find me waiting for him. And I would show him that while $10 can buy you a meal, it can't buy back your soul once you have sold it to the devil. I felt a tear roll down my cheek, the first one since this nightmare began. I wasn't crying for the money. I was crying for the man I hoped my son would become. But that hope was a ghost now. The reality was a cold, hard spreadsheet that didn't lie. "Sleep well, Marcus," I whispered into the dark. "Enjoy the handbag and the house for one more night, because on Friday, the audit begins, and I am the one holding the red pen." I remember the smell of the old garage on Auburn Avenue as if I were standing there right now. It was a thick, comforting mixture of burnt motor oil, stale black coffee, and honest heavy sweat. That was my kingdom for 40 years. I spent my youth under the bellies of rusted delivery trucks, making sure my hands were permanently stained with grease so that my son's hands could stay soft and clean. One humid Saturday afternoon when Marcus was 12 years old, I called him over to the workbench. I had an old Chevy brake assembly laid out, and I wanted to show him the magic of how things worked. I thought it was a rite of passage, a moment for a father to pass down the legacy of self-reliance and the dignity of manual labor. I handed him a wrench, but Marcus didn't take it. He looked at the black oil under my fingernails with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. He didn't see a father building a future. He saw a man who was beneath him. He told me that getting dirty was for people who didn't have brains. He said he was going to be the one who owned the building, not the one who fixed the machines inside it. I didn't get angry that day. I just looked at my calloused palms and wondered if I had worked too hard to shield him from the very grit that makes a man. I realize now that by protecting him from the dirt, I had prevented him from growing roots. Now, 20 years later, the grit was finally coming for him. It was Friday morning and the clock was ticking toward his final chance to save his career at the G Logistics meeting. I watched on the GPS tracker in my office as Marcus sat in his driveway frantically turning the ignition of his German luxury sedan. The engine would cough and sputter, but it refused to catch. I had Jerome send a remote signal to the car's computer system the night before, a simple override that told the fuel pump to stay dormant. It was just another small leak in the dam of his perfect life. A tiny mechanical failure that was about to cause a catastrophic emotional flood. Marcus was trapped. His premium roadside assistance had been canceled along with his credit cards, and he had no one left to call. He was forced to use some of his last remaining cash to pay a tow truck driver to take him to the nearest open repair shop. He didn't realize that the shop he was being towed to, Zeke's Precision Auto, was owned by a man who had been my sergeant in the Army and my loyalist during the Union strikes of the 80s. I followed the tow truck from a distance in the Lincoln, my tinted windows acting as a shield. I wanted to see the look on his face when he stepped into a world he had spent his whole life mocking. Marcus walked into Zeke's shop like he was royalty visiting a peasant village. He didn't see the decades of expertise or the brotherhood of the men working there. He only saw the oil on the floor and the rust on the walls. He strode up to the counter, ignoring the line of customers, and slammed his hand down to get attention. He demanded that his car be prioritized, shouting at a young apprentice who was just trying to help. Zeke walked out from the back, his massive frame silhouetted against the bright light of the welding station. He was 6 feet 4 inches of solid muscle and bad attitude, his face a map of scars and wisdom. He knew exactly who Marcus was. I had called him an hour earlier. Zeke didn't say a word as he hooked up the diagnostic tool. He let Marcus pace the small waiting room, complaining about the smell of tobacco and the lack of air conditioning. When Zeke finally walked back to the counter, he looked at Marcus with a flat, unimpressed stare. He wiped his greasy hands on a red rag and leaned over the desk. "It's going to be $4,000, Zeke said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble. Marcus nearly jumped out of his skin. $4,000. For a fuel pump. That is highway robbery. I know what that part costs, you thief." Zeke didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked Marcus up and down, analyzing the expensive suit that was now wrinkled and stained with sweat. "The price is the price," Zeke said. "It includes the rush fee, the diagnostic fee, and the fee for your terrible attitude. If you don't like it, you can push that shiny toy back out to the street." Marcus lost his mind. He started screaming, calling Zeke a fraud and a bottom feeder. He insulted the shop, the neighborhood, and the very idea of manual labor. He was the creative director of OmniAd, and he couldn't believe a mechanic was talking back to him. Then Zeke did something that made Marcus freeze. He leaned in close, the smell of heavy machinery and tobacco filling my son's personal space. "I know your father," Zeke said, his eyes hard as flint. "I served with Winston Graves. I saw him hold a line when the world was trying to break us. He was a man of substance, a man who knew the value of a hard day's work. You have his height and you have his nose, but that is where the similarity ends. Your father was a pillar of the community. You are just a man of shadows living in a house built by someone else. You look like him on the outside, but your character is like a punctured tire. It doesn't matter how pretty the rim is if there is no air inside to hold up the weight." The truth of it hit Marcus like a physical blow. He didn't have an argument for that. He didn't have a comeback. He was so consumed by rage and humiliation that he swung at Zeke a clumsy, desperate punch that Zeke caught with one hand as if he were catching a fly. Zeke didn't strike back. He just squeezed Marcus's wrist until my son let out a small, pathetic whimper. "Touch me again, boy, and I call the police," Zeke whispered. "You are already on the edge of losing everything. Don't make me be the one who pushes the button." Marcus stumbled back, his face a mask of defeat. He didn't have the $4,000. He didn't even have 400. He realized he was powerless in a world that required more than a business card to navigate. He had to leave the car there. He had to walk out of the shop, his head hanging low, his pride shattered on the oily floor. He walked 2 blocks to the nearest bus stop. I watched from the back of the Lincoln as my son stood on a street corner in downtown Atlanta waiting for the blue line. He looked small. He looked vulnerable. He was surrounded by the very people he had spent his career trying to avoid. There were construction workers in neon vests, mothers carrying heavy grocery bags, and students with tired eyes. When the bus finally arrived, he stepped onto it with a look of pure terror. He sat on the hard plastic seat, his expensive suit jacket bunched up against the window. He was breathing the same air as the working class, feeling every bump in the road, every stop, every reality of life that he had tried to bypass. For 45 minutes he sat in silence, watching the city go by. He was finally seeing the world from the perspective of the man who had raised him. He was learning that the bus doesn't care about your title and the road doesn't care about your suit. As the bus pulled away from his stop, leaving him to walk the last mile to the G Logistics headquarters, I saw him check his reflection in a shop window. He didn't look like a king anymore. He looked like a man who had been through a war and lost. He checked his pocket, pulling out the $10 bill I had returned to him. It was crumpled and dirty, just like the world he was currently standing in. He looked at it for a long time before putting it back. He didn't know that I was watching. He didn't know that every obstacle he had faced today was a lesson I had carefully designed. But as he started to walk toward the glass tower of my company, he wasn't strutting. He was marching. He was beginning to understand that you can't lead people if you are afraid to walk among them. And more importantly, he was realizing that the man he called useless was the only reason he had ever been able to stand at all. The payoff was coming, and as the automatic doors of G Logistics opened for him one last time, he had no idea that the man waiting inside was the one who had finally taught him how to walk. The Grand Hyatt in Buckhead was glowing like a polished diamond under the Georgia night sky. This was the pinnacle of Atlanta high society, the annual black and gold gala where the city's elite came to see and be seen. Every year I used to attend this event as the guest of honor, the man who moved the wheels of industry. But tonight I was a ghost. I sat in the shadows of a private lodge on the second-floor balcony, my hand steadying a glass of sparkling water as I looked down at the sea of tuxedos and silk gowns below. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and desperate ambition. My Parkinson's was acting up a rhythmic tapping of my left foot against the plush carpet, but my mind was as sharp as a razor. I had spent $5,000 on this private booth just to have the best seat for the show I was about to produce. Down on the main floor, I spotted them instantly. Marcus was wearing a tuxedo that was clearly brand new, probably bought with the last few $100s he had scraped together. Beside him, Jessica was a vision of expensive vanity. She wore a gold-sequined gown that caught every light in the room, her neck draped in diamonds that I knew weren't paid for. I checked my tablet. Marcus had used the remainder of the $5,800 he stole from the printing budget to buy 2 VIP tickets to this event. It was a desperate final gamble. He thought that by rubbing shoulders with the billionaires in this room, he could find a way to save himself. He didn't realize that every billionaire in this room was either a friend of mine or an employee. The atmosphere in the ballroom was electric. A rumor was spreading through the crowd like wildfire, jumping from one champagne flute to the next. The word on everyone's lips was $10 million. Earlier that evening, the gala's chairman had announced that an anonymous donor had made a record-breaking contribution to the city's youth foundation, $10 million in a single check. It was the largest individual gift in the history of the event. I watched Marcus and Jessica through my binoculars as they stood near a group of venture capitalists. Marcus looked sick, his face pale and slick with sweat. He was holding a glass of scotch as if it were a life preserver. Jessica, however, was energized by the talk of money. She was leaning in, eavesdropping on a conversation between 2 bank executives. "Can you imagine?" Jessica whispered to Marcus, her voice carrying up to my perch through the directional microphone I had Jerome install. $10 million. Just given away like it was nothing. That is real power, Marcus. That is the kind of life we were supposed to have. Marcus took a heavy gulp of his drink. "We have $10 in our checking account, Jess. Let's just focus on finding someone who can help with the G Logistics deal. I saw Arthur Henderson over by the bar. Maybe I can—" Jessica cut him off with a sharp, venomous look. "Forget Arthur. He is a small fish. We need to find whoever wrote that check. If we could just get 5 minutes with a person who has $10 million to throw away, our problems would vanish." She paused, looking at the empty stage where the donor's name was supposed to be. A bitter, twisted smile crossed her face. "You know what's funny?" she said, her voice dripping with malice. "If your father had actually been the man he pretended to be, we wouldn't be in this mess. If that old man had just been smart enough to save a fraction of what he earned instead of playing the humble mechanic, we wouldn't be hovering around the buffet like beggars in fancy clothes." Marcus looked down at his shoes. He looked ashamed, but he didn't defend me. "Honestly," Jessica continued, leaning closer to his ear, "I wish he would just die already. If he died, at least we could sell that dusty old garage of his. It's probably sitting on a decent plot of land. Even $100,000 from a quick sale would be better than having him haunt us like a useless shadow. But no, he is probably out there right now spending his last few cents on a bus ticket to nowhere while we are here trying to save the family name he dragged through the mud." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, not from fear, but from the absolute clarity of her hatred. She wished me dead for $100,000. She had no idea she was currently standing in a building I held a mortgage on, talking to a man who had $10 million to give away on a whim. I watched as Marcus tried to put on his professional face. He straightened his tie and approached a man standing near the ice sculpture. It was David, my head of internal audit. Marcus didn't recognize him. To Marcus, David just looked like another high-level executive. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus said, extending a hand. "Marcus Graves, creative director at OmniAd." I couldn't help but overhear the talk about the $10 million donation. Incredible, isn't it? David looked at Marcus, his expression unreadable. He didn't shake my son's hand. He just looked at him with a clinical curiosity as if he were examining a bug under a microscope. "It is a significant amount," David said. "The donor is a man who values legacy over luxury, something that seems to be in short supply these days." Marcus laughed nervously, missing the insult entirely. "Absolutely. My agency is actually working on a project for G Logistics. We are all about legacy. Perhaps we could discuss a partnership. I am looking for visionary investors who understand the Graves name." David tilted his head. "The Graves name, I am familiar with it. Winston Graves is a legend in this city, a man of immense integrity. Are you related? Marcus hesitated. I saw the conflict in his eyes. He wanted the prestige of my name, but he didn't want the baggage of the useless father he had created in his mind. He is my father, Marcus said, his voice regaining some of its arrogance. But he is retired. I am the one leading the family into the modern era. He was a bit old school, focused on the small things. I am focused on the big picture. David took a slow sip of his wine. The big picture. I see. And does the big picture include accurate expense reporting? Mr. Graves. Marcus froze. The Scotch glass trembled in his hand. What I don't follow. David leaned in, his voice dropping to a level that only Marcus could hear, but my microphone caught every syllable. I am the man who manages the audits for Graves International. Marcus. I know about the $5,800 you moved on Tuesday. I know about the fake invoice for the printing company. And I know you used that money to buy the tuxedo you are wearing and the tickets to this gala. Marcus looked like he was going to vomit. He stepped back, his eyes darting around the room looking for an exit. Wait, Marcus stammered. I can explain. It was a temporary loan. I was going to replace it once the G Logistics deal closed. There are no loans in the audit department, Marcus David said, his voice flat and cold. There is only theft. You didn't come here to find a partner. You came here to hide from the truth. David turned his back on my son and walked away, leaving Marcus standing alone in the middle of the ballroom. Jessica rushed over, seeing the look on her husband's face. What happened? Did he give you his card? Jessica asked, her eyes searching the crowd for more prey. We have to go, Marcus whispered, his voice shaking. Jess, we have to leave right now. I sat back in my loge and watched them flee. They practically ran through the lobby, Jessica complaining the whole way about how he was ruining her night. They disappeared into the night, heading back to a house they no longer owned to face a future they had stolen. I stood up slowly, leaning on my cane. I walked to the edge of the balcony and looked down at the empty spot where they had been standing. The MC was back on stage, thanking the anonymous donor once again. The crowd erupted in applause. $10 million for the children of Atlanta, a gift from a man they thought was a ghost. I looked at my hand. It was still shaking, but it didn't matter. I had seen enough. Marcus and Jessica were living in a fantasy world, a palace of cards built on a foundation of lies. They thought they were the elite, but they were just actors on a stage I had built. Jerome stepped out from the shadows behind me. The car is ready, sir. Take me home, Jerome, I said. I have a big day tomorrow. I need to be rested for the meeting at G Logistics. As I walked out of the gala, the music swelling behind me, I felt a strange sense of peace. The $10 in my pocket felt heavier than the $10 million I had given away. Because that $10 was the truth. It was the exact price of my son's love. And tomorrow I was going to show him exactly what that price had bought him. The gala continued, the lights and the laughter echoing in the night. But for Marcus and Jessica, the party was over. They just didn't know it yet. They were still hunting for billionaires, never realizing that the biggest one they would ever know was the man they had kicked out into the rain. I settled into the back of the Lincoln, the city lights blurring past. The setup was complete. The audit was documented. The trap was set. All that was left was the final act. And I was going to make sure it was a performance Marcus Graves would never forget. For the rest of his life, whenever he saw a $10 bill, he would remember this night. He would remember the gala, the gold dress, and the father he thought was useless. And he would finally understand that you can't buy respect, and you certainly can't steal a legacy. The wheels of justice in the corporate world do not grind slowly when I am the one turning the crank. By Friday morning, the digital trap I had set for my son was vibrating with the force of a tectonic shift. I sat in my Buckhead penthouse, the morning sun casting long, sharp shadows across the room, watching the security feed from OmniAd. This was the day Marcus thought he would save his life. He had arrived early, looking haggard but determined, clutching his stolen $5,000 presentation. He thought he was prepared for a meeting. He didn't realize he was prepared for an execution. In the executive wing, David, my head of audit, walked into the CEO's office. He carried a single blue folder. Behind him were two men in dark suits from the Atlanta Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. I had given David the green light at 8 a.m. The audit was no longer a shadow file. It was a formal criminal complaint. I watched as Arthur Henderson, the CEO, read the report. His face went from professional calm to a deep, simmering purple. He looked at the evidence of the $50,000 Marcus had siphoned off through fake printing invoices over the last few months. The $5,000 he took for the gala was just the tip of a very ugly iceberg. Marcus had been bleeding the company dry to keep Jessica in designer heels for a long time. Arthur picked up his desk phone. "Send Mr. Graves into the main conference room immediately," he said, his voice cold enough to freeze the air. I switched the camera to the hallway. Marcus was walking toward the conference room, adjusting his tie, trying to find his swagger. He passed his colleagues, people he had looked down on for years, unaware that they were about to witness his total annihilation. He stepped into the room expecting to see a client. Instead, he saw the CEO, the auditors, and the handcuffs resting on the table. "What is this?" Marcus asked, his voice hitting a high, panicked note. "Is the G Logistics team here?" "Marcus Graves," Arthur said, standing up. "You are being terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct, embezzlement, and corporate fraud." Marcus started to laugh, a dry, hysterical sound. "Embezzlement. That is ridiculous. This is a misunderstanding. I have a pitch to give." "I am a Graves," one of the detectives stepped forward. "Mr. Graves, you have the right to remain silent. We have the wire transfers, we have the IP addresses, and we have the confession of the printing vendor you tried to bribe." I watched as the reality hit him. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. His knees buckled and he had to grab the back of a chair to stay upright. The detectives didn't wait. They moved in. They grabbed his arms and pulled them behind his back. The sound of the metal handcuffs ratcheting shut was so clear on my audio feed that I flinched. "Wait," Marcus screamed. "You can't do this. I can pay it back. My father has the money." The detectives didn't listen. They led him out of the conference room and through the center of the open plan office. Every single employee stopped working. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of Marcus's heels dragging on the carpet and his frantic, sobbing pleas. People pulled out their phones. The man who had acted like the king of Omniad was being paraded past the water coolers like a common thief. It was a public humiliation that would stay on the internet forever. I turned off the office feed and switched to the house. I needed to see Jessica. She was in the kitchen surrounded by half-packed boxes for her new yoga studio. She was on the phone with a contractor arguing about the price of mirrored walls. Suddenly there was a loud, heavy knocking at the front door. She sighed, looking annoyed, and walked to the entrance. 2 more officers were standing there with a warrant. "Jessica Graves," the lead officer asked. "We are here to execute a seizure warrant for assets related to a fraud investigation involving Marcus Graves." Jessica's face went white. "Seizure? You can't take anything. This is my house." "Actually, ma'am, the house is owned by a trust that has defaulted," the officer said, handing her a pile of papers. "And the vehicles out front. The Range Rover and the Mercedes are listed as assets purchased or maintained with diverted funds. We need the keys. Now." Jessica didn't ask where Marcus was. She didn't ask if he was okay. She didn't ask what the charges were. She looked at the Range Rover through the window, then looked at the diamond ring on her finger. "How am I supposed to get around?" she shrieked. "You expect me to take the bus? This is a mistake. My husband is a director." "You have 2 hours to remove your personal belongings, ma'am," the officer said, stepping past her. Jessica didn't waste a second. She didn't cry. She didn't call the jail. She ran to her bedroom, grabbed her designer handbags, and reached for her laptop. I watched as she typed frantically into a search engine. She wasn't looking for a bail bondsman. She was looking for the top-rated divorce attorney in Buckhead. She dialed a number, her voice shaking with a cold, calculated fury. "Yes, I need to speak with Mr. Kaplan immediately. It is an emergency. My husband has been arrested for a major crime and he has destroyed our financial standing. I need an ironclad filing before the state freezes my personal accounts. I want to file for annulment based on fraud. I am the victim here." I sat back in my chair watching her pack her jewelry and leave the house through the back door to avoid the neighbors. She was a rat leaving a sinking ship exactly as I knew she would. She didn't love Marcus. She loved the shadow I had cast over him. Now that the shadow was gone, he was nothing to her. An hour later, I was sitting in the observation room at the police station. I was behind the one-way glass looking at Marcus. He was sitting in a metal chair in an interrogation room. His tie was gone, his shirt was sweat-stained, and his face was a mask of snot and tears. Across from him sat a detective named Miller. "Look," Marcus said, leaning across the table, his voice a desperate whisper. I didn't want to do it. I was under so much pressure. Pressure for what Miller asked. A luxury lifestyle. No, Marcus lied, and I felt my heart harden into a diamond. It was for my father, Winston Graves. He is 73, he is very sick. Dementia, heart failure, you name it. He was kicked out of his care facility and I had to take him in. The medical bills were thousands of dollars a week. I couldn't let him die on the street. I am a good son. I did it for him. I took the money to keep my father alive. Detective Miller looked at a file on the table. Your father, you say? The one you reported as a missing person 2 days ago, the one you claimed had wandered off. Yes, Marcus shouted, sensing a lifeline. He wandered off because I couldn't afford the 24-hour nursing he needed. I was trying to save him. Please, you have to understand. My father is useless. He can't even feed himself. I was the only thing standing between him and a pauper's grave. I am the victim of a broken healthcare system. I stood up from my chair behind the glass. I looked at the back of my son's head. He was using me as a shield. He was using the very man he threw out into a storm to justify the theft he used to buy Jessica's handbags. He was painting me as a pathetic dying burden to gain sympathy from the law. I tapped on the glass. It was a signal. The door to the interrogation room opened. Detective Miller looked up. Marcus turned around, expecting his lawyer. I walked into the room. I wasn't wearing flannel. I wasn't shaking. I was wearing a $3,000 charcoal suit. My posture was straight, and my eyes were like twin barrels of a shotgun. Marcus's jaw dropped. He stopped breathing. He looked at me, then at the detective, then back at me. "Dad," he whispered. I walked right up to the table. I didn't say a word. I pulled the wet $10 bill out of my pocket, the one he had thrown at me. I laid it on the table in front of him. The detective stood up. "Mr. Graves, thank you for coming." Marcus looked at the detective, his eyes bulging. You know him, Marcus?" I said, my voice a low, thunderous growl that made him flinch. "I am the man who reported the embezzlement. I am the man who provided the wire transfer records, and I am the man who just watched you lie to a police officer about my health to cover your own cowardice." Marcus started to shake. But you were broke. You were a mechanic. You lived in the basement. I lived in the basement because I wanted to see who you were when you thought I had nothing, I said. And you showed me. You showed me that you would throw your own father into a storm for $10. You showed me that you would steal from the company I built to buy a life you didn't earn, and now you have shown me that you would blame a sick man for your own crimes. I leaned down, getting inches from his face. I am not sick, Marcus. And I am not useless. I am the chairman of Graves International. And as of this morning, I have officially disowned you. Your wife is currently filing for divorce. Your house is being boarded up. And the $10 on this table, that is the only money you have left in this world." Marcus let out a wail, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. "No, Dad, please, I was confused. I was doing it for us." I turned my back on him. I walked to the door. "Detective," I said, not looking back, "I want to press charges to the fullest extent of the law. No plea deals. No leniency. He needs to learn what it feels like to earn his keep in a place where the walls are made of stone." I walked out of the room, the sound of my son's screaming echoing down the hallway. I walked out of the station and into the bright Atlanta sun. Jerome was waiting by the Lincoln, the door open. I sat in the back seat and closed my eyes. The war was over. The rats were caught. But the house was empty. "Take me to the cemetery, Jerome," I said. "I need to talk to Betty. I need to tell her that our son finally learned the value of $1. As we drove away, I looked at my hands. They were perfectly steady. The tremor was gone. Sometimes the only way to heal a body is to cut out the poison. And today I was finally clean. The cold, iron taste of fear was still lingering in my son's mouth as he walked out of the precinct. Marcus didn't know it was my signature on the bail bond. He thought he had caught a lucky break, or that one of his shadowy connections had finally come through. I watched from the tinted depths of the Lincoln as he stepped onto the sidewalk, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. His expensive suit was a ruin of wrinkles and sweat stains. He looked like a man who had been chewed up and spat out by a machine he didn't understand. Jerome sat silently in the driver's seat, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "He is heading home, sir," Jerome said softly. "I know," I replied, my voice a low rumble. "He is heading to a house that no longer belongs to him, to a woman who never belonged to him. Let him see the ashes of his empire, Jerome. It is the only way he will learn." We followed him at a distance. Marcus drove like a ghost, drifting between lanes, his hands probably shaking on the steering wheel. When he pulled into the driveway of the house in the Highlands, the sight was enough to break a lesser man. The lush green lawn was already starting to look overgrown. The Range Rover was gone. The Mercedes was gone. And in their place was a single dusty taxi idling at the curb. Marcus stumbled out of his car and ran toward the front door. I checked the audio feed from the hidden microphones I had installed in the foyer. The house was no longer a home. It was a battlefield. Jessica was there. She wasn't crying. She wasn't packing a small bag of essentials. She was standing in the middle of the living room, surrounded by 3 massive suitcases and a pile of designer shoeboxes. She was wearing a trench coat and sunglasses, looking like she was ready for a flight to Paris, not a trip to a lawyer's office. Marcus burst through the door, breathless. "Jess. Oh God, Jess, I'm out. They let me go. We can fix this. We just need to talk to my dad. He showed up at the station. He's not sick, he's rich. He's the chairman of Graves Logistics. If we just apologize, if we play our cards right..." Jessica didn't even look at him. She was busy checking her reflection in a hand mirror, adjusting her lipstick with a cold, clinical precision. "Apologize?" she asked, her voice flat and sharp as a razor. "There is no we, Marcus. There hasn't been a we since the moment those detectives put you in handcuffs in front of the whole city. You are a felon. You are an embezzler. You are a loser." Marcus flinched as if she had slapped him. "Jess, don't say that. I did it for you. The bags, the jewelry, the house. I took that money to give you the life you wanted." Jessica finally looked at him, and the hatred in her eyes was so pure it was breathtaking. "For me, you did it because you were too weak to tell me no. You did it because you wanted to pretend you were a big man. But you're not a big man, Marcus. You're a pathetic little boy who was playing dress-up in his father's shadow. And now that shadow is gone, and I am not staying to watch the sun go down on this pathetic life." She moved toward the door, dragging a suitcase behind her. Marcus blocked her path, his face twisting with desperation. "You can't leave me. We're married, Jess. We took vows." "Vows?" She laughed, a high mocking sound that echoed through the empty hallway. "I took vows to a man I thought was the heir to a fortune. I took vows to a man who told me his father owned half of Georgia. I didn't take vows to a thieving creative director who lives on an allowance from a man he called useless." She shoved him out of the way, her strength surprising him. "You want to know the truth, Marcus? I didn't marry you for your charm. I didn't marry you for your personality. I married you because I saw those old photos of your father's land in South Georgia. I thought the old man was sitting on millions in timber and real estate. I thought he was just a stingy old fool who would die soon and leave it all to us. I spent 3 years of my life waiting for that man to drop dead." Marcus stared at her, his jaw hanging open. You were waiting for him to die." "Every single day," Jessica hissed, leaning in close, her perfume cloying and suffocating in the stagnant air. "I hated every minute I spent in this house with that shaking, mumbling old man. I hated the smell of his medicine. I hated the way he looked at me like he knew exactly what I was. And the worst part is, he did know. He was smarter than both of us. He played us like fiddles. He made me think he was a pauper so I would reveal my hand, and I fell for it. But I'm not falling for anything else." She grabbed the handle of her second suitcase. "My lawyer has already filed the annulment. It's based on fraud, Marcus. You lied about your financial standing. You lied about your assets. You are a fraud in every sense of the word." "But I love you," Marcus whispered, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. Jessica stopped at the door. She looked back at the house, at the empty walls where the expensive art had already been removed. "Love doesn't pay for the lifestyle I require," she said. "And frankly, Marcus, you were always a disappointment in bed anyway." She walked out the door and signaled the taxi driver. Marcus stood in the foyer watching her load her bags. He didn't move. He didn't try to stop her again. The realization was finally sinking in. He had traded his father's soul for a woman who would sell him for a bus ticket. He had betrayed the only man who ever truly loved him for a ghost of a dream that was never real. I sat in the Lincoln watching the taxi pull away. Jessica didn't look back once. She was already gone, already hunting for her next victim. Marcus turned back into the house. He walked into the kitchen and saw the orange pill bottle she had thrown in the trash days ago. He picked it up. He looked at the label. Winston Graves. He sank to the floor, clutching the bottle to his chest. He wasn't crying for me. He was crying for himself. He was crying because he finally realized that he was the useless one. He was the burden. He was the mistake. I leaned forward and spoke to Jerome. "It is time." Jerome nodded and stepped out of the car. He walked up to the front door of the house. He didn't knock. He used his master key. Marcus looked up, fear flaring in his eyes, as a large man in a suit entered his home. "Who are you?" Marcus stammered, scrambling to his feet. "My name is Jerome," the man said, his voice deep and final. "I am the head of security for Graves International, and I am here to tell you that you have 10 minutes to gather what is yours and vacate the premises." "Vacate?" Marcus asked. "This is my house." "No, mister," Graves Jerome said, handing him a legal notice. "This house is owned by the Winston Graves Family Trust. As of the signing of your severance agreement on Tuesday, your right to occupy this property has been terminated. The locks are being changed as we speak." Marcus looked at the paper. He looked at the pills in his hand. He looked at the empty rooms. "Where am I supposed to go?" he asked, his voice a broken whimper. "That is no longer our concern," Jerome said. "But I believe you still have that $10 bill in your pocket. I suggest you use it wisely." I watched from the car as Marcus walked out of the house for the last time. He didn't have a suitcase. He didn't have a coat. He just had the clothes on his back and a crumpled piece of paper. He stood on the sidewalk, the same spot where he had thrown me out into the rain. The irony was perfect. The justice was absolute. He looked at the Lincoln. He knew I was in there. He started to walk toward the car, his hands outstretched in a plea. Dad, please. I'm sorry, I see it now. She's gone. Dad, I have nothing. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't acknowledge him. I simply looked straight ahead. The son I loved was a memory. The man on the sidewalk was a stranger who had to learn the hardest lesson of all. You can't build a future on the wreckage of the people who built you. Drive, Jerome, I said. The Lincoln pulled away from the curb, leaving Marcus standing alone in the middle of the street. In the rearview mirror, I saw him drop to his knees. He was weeping, his forehead touching the cold pavement. He was finally where he needed to be. At the bottom. As we drove toward the city, I felt a strange sense of closure. The family trial was over. The verdict was in. Marcus had lost everything, but in the emptiness of his life there was finally room for something new to grow. If he survived this, if he worked and sweat and bled for his own bread, maybe one day he would be a man I could recognize. But for now, I had a grandson to raise. I had a legacy to protect. And I had a $10 bill in my pocket that I was going to frame and put on my desk. Not as a trophy of revenge, but as a reminder of the day I regained my freedom. The lights of Atlanta sparkled ahead of us, a city of second chances and cold realities. I was Winston Graves, and I was finally home. The heavy iron door of the precinct hissed shut behind Marcus with a sound that signaled the end of his life as he knew it. He stood on the cracked sidewalk of downtown Atlanta, squinting against the harsh morning sun that offered no warmth, only exposure. He looked like a man who had been chewed up and spat out by a machine he didn't understand. His $2,000 suit was a ruin of wrinkles and sweat stains, and his hair, usually perfectly styled, was a chaotic mess. He didn't know that it was my signature on the bail bond that had opened that door. He didn't know that his temporary freedom was just the next stage of my design. He probably thought his charm had finally worked on a guard, or that one of his shallow friends had finally answered the phone. I sat in the back of my Lincoln across the street, watching him through the tinted glass. I could see the wheels turning in his head. He wasn't thinking about me. He wasn't thinking about the father he had betrayed. He was thinking about how to save his own skin. He climbed into a dusty yellow taxi, the only thing he could afford, with the crumpled bills in his pocket, and I signaled Jerome to follow him. "We are heading to the house," Sir Jerome said, his voice as steady as a heartbeat. I leaned back into the leather seat, feeling the weight of the $10 bill in my pocket. "Yes, Jerome. He is going home to find the only thing he has left. A woman who never loved him, and a house that no longer belongs to him. Let the play begin." The Highlands was quiet as the taxi pulled into the driveway. It was the kind of neighborhood where people pruned their roses and pretended that scandal didn't exist. But today, every window seemed like an eye watching Marcus stumble out of the cab. The yard was starting to look wild, the grass growing long because the landscaping service I paid for had been canceled. The silence of the street was heavy, a suffocating blanket of judgment. Marcus ran to the front door, fumbling with his keys, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I activated the remote audio feed from the microphones hidden in the foyer. I wanted to hear the exact moment his heart finally broke. He burst through the door, shouting her name. Jessica, I am out. I am home. The house didn't smell like the expensive candles she used to burn. It smelled like cardboard and dust. Jessica was standing in the middle of the living room, but she wasn't waiting with open arms. She was surrounded by 4 massive suitcases. Her designer handbags piled on the sofa like trophies from a war she had won. She was wearing her trench coat and sunglasses indoors, looking like a movie star preparing for a getaway. She was holding her phone, her thumb scrolling rapidly, likely checking the status of her flight or her lawyer. Marcus stopped in his tracks, his eyes bulging. What? What is this, Jess? What are you doing with the bags? Jessica finally looked at him, lowering her sunglasses just enough to show eyes that were as cold as a frozen lake. She didn't offer him a hug. She didn't even offer him a seat. I am leaving Marcus, she said, her voice flat and devoid of any emotion. I thought that was obvious. Leaving Marcus stepped toward her, his hands outstretched in a desperate plea. You can't leave. I am out on bail. We can fix this. I know everything went wrong, but my dad is rich, Jess. He is a chairman. He has millions. If we just go to him, if we apologize and tell him you were the one who pushed me, if we just talk to him, he will help us. He is my father. He won't let us starve. Jessica let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed through the empty hallway. It was a sound that made Marcus flinch. You still don't get it, do you? She said, stepping over a shoebox. There is no we, Marcus. There hasn't been a we since the moment you were led out of your office in handcuffs. You are a felon. You are a disgraced executive with no future and even less money. And as for your father, you really think he is going to welcome you back? He spent 5 years watching you treat him like dirt. He is the one who set you up. He is the one who took the house back. He is 10 steps ahead of you, and I am not staying around to be crushed under his boot. But I did it all for you, Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with a hysterical edge. The bags, the jewelry, the luxury, I stole that money so you wouldn't have to live a common life. I sacrificed my integrity for you. Jessica leaned in her face inches from his, her perfume cloying in the stagnant air. You didn't do it for me, Marcus. You did it because you were too weak to be a man on your own. You wanted to buy a life you didn't earn. And frankly, I am tired of playing the part of the devoted wife to a fraud. She grabbed the handle of her largest suitcase and started to wheel it toward the door. Marcus grabbed her arm, his grip frantic. You can't go. You took an oath. You said for better or for worse. Jessica ripped her arm away with a snarl of disgust. I took an oath to a man I thought was the heir to a massive estate. Do you want to know why I stayed with you for 3 years in this boring suburbs? It wasn't because of your personality, believe me. It was because of those photos I saw on your father's old desk. The ones of the thousands of acres of timberland in South Georgia. I thought the old man was sitting on a gold mine of real estate and just living like a peasant to be stingy. I thought he was going to drop dead any day and leave us the keys to a kingdom. I spent every night for 1,000 days wishing that man would stop breathing so I could finally be the queen I was born to be. Marcus stared at her, his jaw hanging open as the truth hit him like a physical blow. You were waiting for him to die. Every single day, Jessica hissed. I hated the way he smelled like grease. I hated his shaking hands. I hated that he existed at all because he was the only thing standing between me and the Graves' fortune. But it turns out the joke was on me. He wasn't a senile old fool. He was the one holding the leash. He made me think he was a pauper just to see if I was a vulture, and I fell for it. But I am done now. My lawyer has already filed the annulment. It is based on your criminal activity and financial fraud. You are nothing but a mistake on my resume. She shoved him aside and walked out the door, signaling the taxi driver who was waiting at the curb. Marcus stood in the foyer watching her load the suitcases he had paid for with stolen money into the car. He didn't move. He didn't cry. He just stood there as the last piece of his fantasy world drove away. I sat in the Lincoln watching the taxi disappear around the corner. Marcus turned back into the house, his head hanging low. He walked into the kitchen and saw the orange pill bottle sitting on the counter. He picked it up. He looked at the name on the label, Winston Graves. I watched him fall to his knees on the cold tile floor. He started to sob, but it wasn't the sob of a man seeking redemption. It was the sob of a man who realized he had lost a winning lottery ticket. The money he whispered into the empty house. All that money. He was the chairman. I could have had everything. I could have been a prince. And I threw it away for her. I threw away millions for a woman who didn't even like me. I gripped the armrest of my seat. Even now, at the absolute bottom, his first thought was the money, not the fact that he had broken his father's heart. Not the fact that he had left a sick man in the rain. He was only mourning the loss of the inheritance. He wasn't sorry for the sin. He was sorry for the consequence. Jerome. I said, my voice cold and final. It is time to end this. Jerome stepped out of the car and walked up to the house. He didn't knock. He used the master key to open the door. Marcus looked up, fear flaring in his eyes as he saw the large man in the suit entering the kitchen. "Who are you?" Marcus stammered, scrambling to his feet. "My name is Jerome," the man said. "I am the head of security for Graves International, and I am here to inform you that the eviction notice served on Tuesday is now in full effect. You have 5 minutes to gather your personal items and leave." "Leave?" Marcus asked, his voice a broken whimper. "Where am I supposed to go? My wife is gone. I have no car. I have no job." Jerome didn't offer a word of comfort. He simply pointed to the door. "I believe you still have that $10 bill in your pocket, Mr. Graves. I suggest you start walking." I watched from the car as Marcus walked out of the house for the last time. He didn't have a bag. He didn't have a coat. He just had the clothes on his back and a heart full of greed that had finally consumed him. He stood on the sidewalk, the same spot where he had spat in my face. The irony was perfect. The justice was absolute. He looked at the Lincoln. He knew I was there. He started to walk toward the car, his arms outstretched in a final desperate plea. Dad, I see it now. I was wrong. Please don't leave me like this. I am your son." I didn't roll down the window. I didn't look at him. I simply looked straight ahead at the road. The son I loved was a ghost. The man on the sidewalk was a stranger who had to learn the value of $1 the hard way. "Drive Jerome," I said. The Lincoln pulled away, leaving Marcus quivering in the rearview mirror as he dropped to his knees on the pavement. He was finally alone. He was finally broke. And for the first time in 73 years, I was finally free. The sunset over Buckhead that evening was the color of a deep purple bruise. I sat in my darkened study, the only light coming from the bank of security monitors that served as my window to the world. For 3 days I had lived in this silence, watching the pieces of my son's life fall apart from a distance. I was the one who had instructed Sterling to leave a copy of the property tax records for this mansion, in a place where Marcus's lawyers would find them. I knew that once the realization hit him, once he understood that the man he called useless was sitting on a mountain of gold, he would come crawling. A predator always follows the scent of blood, but a parasite always follows the scent of money. And Marcus was the ultimate parasite. On screen 4, a figure appeared at the far end of the driveway. He didn't come in a taxi this time. He came on foot, his silhouette small and defeated against the towering oak trees that lined the estate. Marcus was no longer the peacock I remembered. His expensive clothes were gone, replaced by a faded hoodie and jeans that looked like they had been slept in. He walked with a heavy, performative limp, his head hanging low as if the weight of his regret was too much to bear. He reached the massive gold-plated iron gates and stopped. He looked up at the security cameras, and for a second I saw the old Marcus flash in his eyes. It wasn't sorrow I saw. It was a cold, calculating appraisal of the property value. He was counting the windows. He was measuring the height of the fence. He was already spending the money in his mind. Then the show began. Marcus dropped to his knees right there on the cold concrete. He gripped the bars of the gate with both hands, his knuckles turning white. He buried his face against the iron and started to sob. The audio feed picked up the sound of his wailing, a high-pitched, desperate sound that echoed through the quiet neighborhood. He was calling my name. He was begging for a father he had discarded like a piece of trash. It was a masterpiece of theater. If I hadn't seen him throw that $10 bill at me in the rain, I might have actually believed him. Jerome stood behind me, his arms crossed over his chest, his face a mask of disgust. "He is quite the actor, sir," Jerome said. "Shall I call the police and have him removed for trespassing?" I watched Marcus through the screen. He was rocking back and forth now, his tears wetting the pavement. "No, Jerome," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Open the gates. I want him to see what he lost. I want him to walk through the garden of the man he thought was a beggar. Let the prodigal son return to the house he never earned." The heavy gates began to swing open with a low mechanical hum. Marcus jumped back, startled by the sudden movement. He stood up slowly, wiping his face with his sleeve, making sure to keep his expression one of tragic humility. He began the long walk up the driveway. I watched him through the various cameras. As he passed the infinity pool, his eyes went wide, As he saw the collection of vintage cars visible through the glass walls of the secondary garage, his jaw actually dropped. He was breathing heavily now, not from the walk, but from the sheer adrenaline of greed. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. He thought he had found the ultimate jackpot. He thought the game was finally over, and he had won. Jerome met him at the front door. Marcus tried to push past him, but Jerome was a wall of muscle that didn't budge. My father, Marcus, gasped, trying to sound breathless. "I need to see my father. I have been looking for him everywhere. I am so sorry for everything. The chairman is expecting you," Jerome said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Follow me." They walked through the grand foyer. I knew Marcus was looking at the marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, and the original oil paintings on the walls. He was a man who worshipped status, and he was currently standing in the Holy of Holies. He looked like a kid in a candy store who had just realized he owned the store. I saw him reach out to touch a gold leaf vase, his fingers trembling with a hunger that was almost primal. He thought this was his second chance. He thought he could charm his way back into a life of luxury. Jerome opened the double doors to my study. I didn't get up. I sat behind my mahogany desk, the light of the desk lamp casting half of my face in shadow. I looked every bit the powerful chairman I was. Marcus stepped into the room and froze. He looked at the room, then at me, then back at the room. The silence stretched out thick and heavy. "Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking. I didn't answer immediately. I picked up a fountain pen and signed a document, taking my time, letting him stand there in his rags while I sat in my kingdom. Finally, I looked up. "Sit down, Marcus," I said. He didn't sit. He ran toward the desk and dropped to his knees again. He tried to grab my hand, but I pulled it back. He started to cry again, real tears this time, fueled by the overwhelming presence of wealth. "Dad, oh God. Dad, I am so sorry." He sobbed, his forehead touching the edge of my desk. I was a fool. I was a monster. Jessica, she manipulated me. She got in my head. I didn't know what I was doing. When I realized you were gone, my heart broke. I have been living in a shelter, Dad. I have been eating out of trash cans. I realized that money doesn't matter. Only you matter. I leaned back in my chair watching him. It was a beautiful lie. He mentioned the shelter to make me feel guilty, but I knew he had spent the last 2 nights in a cheap motel using the last of his stolen funds. He blamed Jessica because it was easier than taking responsibility. "You found the house," I said, my voice flat. Yes, Marcus looked up, his eyes red and pleading. "I didn't care about the house, Dad. I just wanted to find you. When I saw this place, I couldn't believe it. Why did you live in that basement? Why did you let us treat you like that? You could have lived like a king. I lived there because I wanted to see if my son would be a man of character without the promise of an inheritance," I said. "I wanted to see if you loved the father or the fortune. And you gave me your answer in the rain, Marcus. You gave it to me for $10. Marcus flinched. "That wasn't me, Dad. I was stressed. I was scared. Please, I am your only son. I love you. I realize that family is everything. I don't want the money. I just want to be your son again. I want to take care of you. I will work for you. I will do anything." I looked at him for a long time. I saw the lie behind his eyes. He said he didn't want the money, but his gaze kept drifting to the safe in the corner of the room. He said he wanted to be my son, but he was already imagining himself sitting in my chair. "Why did you come back, Marcus?" I asked softly. "Because I love you," he said, his voice thick with fake emotion. "Because you are my father, and I realized I can't live without you." I sighed and looked at the clock. The performance was over. The bait had been taken. "I believe you, Marcus," I said, lied right back to him. "I want to believe you." Marcus's face lit up with a look of pure triumph. He thought he had done it. He thought he had cracked the old man's heart. "Thank you, Dad," he whispered. "You won't regret this. I will prove it to you. I will be the best son you ever had." I signaled to Jerome. "Jerome, show Marcus to the guest wing. Give him some clean clothes and a hot meal. We have a lot to talk about tomorrow." Marcus stood up, his posture instantly straightening. He wiped his eyes and gave me a humble nod. "Thank you, Dad. Good night." He followed Jerome out of the room. I watched him on the monitor as he walked down the hallway. The moment the door to the study closed, his face changed. The sorrow vanished. A smug, arrogant grin spread across his face. He started to hum a tune. He ran his hand along the silk wallpaper, his eyes gleaming with the light of a man who had just won the lottery. He thought he was home. He thought the nightmare was over. I sat back in the dark and picked up the $10 bill. "You think you are moving in, Marcus," I whispered to the empty room. "But you are just moving into a bigger cage. You said you want to be my son. You said you want to work for me. Fine. Tomorrow your real job begins, and I promise you, you are going to earn every single cent of that $10 back." I turned off the monitors. The house was quiet, but the war was far from over. Marcus Graves was back in my world, but he was no longer the prince. He was the prisoner, and I was going to make sure he understood the difference before the sun went down again. The game of cat and mouse had reached its final stage, and this time the cat wasn't going to let go until the truth was all that remained. Marcus walked down the red-carpeted hallway of the guest wing, his feet feeling like they were floating on clouds. He was draped in a heavy silk robe that Jerome had provided, a piece of luxury that only hours ago had been a distant dream. In his mind, everything was back on track. He believed he had successfully played the prodigal son. He believed that the bond of fatherly love, which he considered a weakness, had won over my business logic. He looked out the window at the vast moonlit grounds of my Buckhead estate and smirked. He was already planning the changes he would make. He would fire the security team. He would sell off the vintage cars he didn't like. He would turn the library into a high-tech media room. He was a winner again, a man who had found the ultimate shortcut back to the top. He had no idea that beneath his feet in the grand dining room a different kind of sentence was being prepared. A soft knock at the door broke his reverie. It was Jerome. "The chairman is waiting for you in the dining room," he said, his voice a flat, emotionless drone. Marcus straightened the lapels of his robe, practiced his most humble expression in the mirror, and followed Jerome downstairs. He was starving. He hadn't eaten a real meal since the day he threw me out, and the smell of roasting meat seemed to waft through the air. He imagined a feast, perhaps a Wagyu ribeye poached lobster, and a bottle of the 1982 Bordeaux I kept in the cellar for special occasions. He felt his stomach growl with a mixture of hunger and greed. He told himself this was his reward for his brilliant performance in the study. The grand dining room was a masterpiece of intimidation. The mahogany table was 20 feet long, polished to such a high gloss that it reflected the flickering light of a dozen tall candles like a dark, deep lake. I sat at the far end, the head of the table, looking every bit the sovereign of a corporate empire. I didn't look like a mechanic. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a man who owned the air Marcus was breathing. "Sit down, Marcus," I said, my voice echoing in the vast, silent room. I gestured to the chair at the opposite end of the table. The distance between us was a physical manifestation of the canyon that now separated our souls. Marcus sat looking small in the high-backed velvet chair. He tried to maintain the act. He looked around the room with wide, feigned wonder. "Dad, this is incredible," he said, his voice trembling with artificial emotion. "I am still trying to process all of this. I feel so ashamed that I didn't see the man you truly were. I was so caught up in my own little world. I promise I am going to make it up to you. I don't need any of this luxury. I just need your guidance." I looked at him over the flame of a candle. My hands were perfectly still. "Are you comfortable, Marcus? Is the robe soft enough? Is the room warm enough? I want to make sure you feel exactly how you think you deserve to feel." "Beyond comfortable," he replied, leaning forward. "I feel like I am home." I nodded slowly. "Good. Because tonight is a celebration of the value of our relationship. I wanted to prepare a meal that perfectly represents what we mean to each other. A meal that reflects the price you put on my life 9 months ago." Marcus's smile faltered just for a second, a flicker of confusion crossing his face before he smoothed it over. "Of course, Dad. Anything you want to share." Jerome emerged from the shadows near the kitchen door. He carried a massive silver platter, the kind used for serving a whole turkey or a suckling pig. The silver dome, the cloche, was polished to a mirror finish. Marcus's eyes lit up. He sat up straighter, his napkin already in his lap. He was ready for the Wagyu. He was ready for the proof of his father's forgiveness. Jerome placed the platter in front of Marcus. He stood there for a moment, his hand on the silver handle. "Dinner is served," Jerome said. He lifted the lid with a flourish. Marcus leaned in his mouth, practically watering. But the smell that hit him wasn't garlic or butter or roasted fat. It was the smell of cold, stale bread and old paper. He looked down at the silver plate and his face went white. The expression of greed was replaced by a look of pure, stuttering horror. On the center of the glistening silver platter sat a single crumpled $10 bill. The very same $10 bill he had thrown at my chest in the rain. It was dry now, but the stains of the gutter were still visible on the edges of the paper. Next to the money was a cheap plastic-wrapped ham and cheese sandwich, the kind you buy at a gas station for $3 when you are at your lowest point. Marcus stared at the plate as if it were a severed head. He looked at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Dad, what? What is this? I don't understand." I stood up slowly, the wood of my chair scraping against the marble floor. I walked the length of the table, my cane tapping a rhythmic hollow sound. I stopped right next to him. "You don't understand," I asked, my voice a low, dangerous rumble. "This is the value of family that you calculated, Marcus. This is the exact price of 30 years of my sweat and blood. You gave me this $10 and told me it was more than I was worth. You told me to go buy dog food. Well, I didn't buy dog food. I bought this sandwich. I sat on a park bench in the freezing rain and I ate this very same meal while I watched the lights of your house stay warm." I leaned down, my face inches from his. I saw the sweat breaking out on his forehead. "You said you loved me, Marcus. You said you didn't care about the money. You said you wanted to take care of me. Well, here is your chance. This is your dinner. This is the only thing you have earned in this house. This is the currency of our relationship." Marcus started to shake. "Dad, please, I told you I was sorry. I was stressed. I didn't mean it. You can't do this." "I can do whatever I want with my property," I said, pointing at the sandwich. "Eat. If you love me as much as you say, you will cherish this meal. Because it represents the moment I realized my son was a stranger. It represents the moment I decided to stop being a father and start being a teacher." Marcus looked at the dry gray meat peeking out from the bread. He looked at the dirty $10 bill. He looked at the luxury of the room around him, the gold and the marble that he was now realizing were weapons, not gifts. "Eat it," I commanded. My voice was no longer that of a father. It was the voice of a man who had seen the bottom of the world and survived. Marcus reached out with a trembling hand. He picked up the sandwich. He fumbled with the plastic wrap, the sound of the crinkling cellophane loud and pathetic in the silence. He took a bite. It was dry. It was tasteless. It was the taste of his own cowardice. He started to cry real tears of humiliation as he chewed the bread. I watched him. I felt no joy in it, only a cold, hard satisfaction. The lesson had finally begun. "You think you are moving back in, Marcus?" I asked as he choked down the bite. "You think you are going to spend your days in a silk robe waiting for me to die so you can take the keys? No. Tomorrow morning, Jerome will wake you at 5 a.m. You will be given a pair of greasy overalls and a set of tools. You are going to work in the maintenance bay of G Logistics. You will scrub the oil off the floors. You will change the tires on the long haulers. You will do the work I did for 40 years. Marcus looked up, gasping. "A mechanic. But I am a director. I have a degree. You have nothing." I snapped. "You signed it all away for $10. You will work 60 hours a week, and every Friday I will personally hand you a $10 bill. That will be your salary. You will pay me for the room. You will pay me for the food. And you will stay in that garage until you understand that a man's worth isn't measured by what he takes, but by what he builds." I reached out and picked up the $10 bill from his plate. I tucked it back into my pocket. "You said you wanted to be my son again, Marcus? Well, this is how you do it. You earn the name Graves. Or you can walk out that door right now with nothing but that sandwich in your belly. The choice is yours." I turned my back on him and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew he would stay. His greed was still stronger than his pride. He would eat the dry sandwich and he would wear the greasy overalls, hoping that if he suffered enough, I would eventually give him the empire. But he didn't realize that the empire was already gone. I had already signed the papers to turn Graves International into a worker-owned cooperative upon my death. My grandson Leo would have a trust for his education, but Marcus would never see a single cent of the fortune. He was going to spend the rest of his life earning exactly what he was worth. As I walked up the stairs to my room, I felt the weight of 73 years finally lift. I had finally told the truth. I had finally set the price. And as I looked at the $10 bill in my hand one last time, I realized it was the best investment I had ever made. It had bought me the one thing money usually destroys. It had bought me the truth. The house was silent save for the distant sound of a man sobbing in a dark dining room eating a cheap sandwich on a silver platter. The lesson was over. The legacy was safe. and for the first time in 9 months I slept without a single tremor in my hands. This is the lesson of the Graves family. You can't buy respect, you can't steal a legacy, and you should never ever underestimate a man who knows the value of $10. Because a man who can survive on $10 can take away everything you own with a single stroke of a pen. I sat on my porch the next morning watching the sun rise over Atlanta. I saw Marcus being led to the service van by Jerome, his head hanging low, his hands already beginning to smudge with the dirt of the real world. He was starting at the bottom, and for the first time in his life he was actually going to earn his way up. I took a deep breath of the morning air. It smelled like rain, and it smelled like freedom. My story was finally mine again. And Marcus, he was finally becoming a man. It only took losing everything to find out who he really was. The $10 father was gone, the chairman was back, and the world was exactly as it should be. Balanced, just, and earned, $1 at a time. Marcus sat in the leather armchair of my study, a glass of expensive red wine in his hand, and his feet resting on the mahogany desk that 9 months ago he wouldn't have dared to touch. He was smiling the smug, entitled grin of a man who thought he had just rediscovered a gold mine. He believed the tests with the dry sandwich and the $10 bill from the night before were just the final petty grievances of a senile old man. He thought he had successfully navigated the storm and was now officially the prince of the castle again. He had no idea that my silence wasn't forgiveness. It was the calm before a final devastating justice. I walked into the room without saying a word. I didn't look at him as I walked toward the entertainment console and picked up the remote. Marcus scrambled to his feet, putting on his mask of humble devotion. "Dad." "I am ready," he said, his voice dripping with artificial sincerity. "I am headed to the G Logistics maintenance bay right now. I am going to start from the bottom, just like you said. I want to prove my love to you. I want to show you that I am a Graves." I didn't acknowledge his words. I didn't even look his way. I just pressed a button on the remote and the massive 80-inch screen on the wall flickered to life. Marcus stopped talking. The smile died on his face as the first video began to play. It was the footage from the security cameras outside his house from 9 months ago, the rainy night. The storm was howling through the speakers, and there I was standing on the porch, soaked and shivering. Then Marcus appeared on the screen. He looked younger, arrogant, and full of a poisonous pride. The speakers caught every word with chilling clarity. "You're nothing but useless," his digital self screamed at me. He pulled out his wallet and tossed the $10 bill at my chest. "Take this and get lost, old man. Buy yourself some dog food because that is all you are worth. Don't ever come back here." Marcus froze. The wine glass in his hand began to chatter against his teeth before it slipped from his fingers. The red liquid splashed across the white Persian rug, spreading like a pool of blood. He tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing, but I didn't let him. I pressed the remote again. The next video played. It was the interrogation room at the police station from just days ago. Marcus was leaning across the table, weeping to Detective Miller. "I took the money to save my father," he sobbed on the screen. "Winston Graves is a vegetable. He has dementia. He has heart failure. He is a dirty, confused old man who can't even feed himself. I had to steal that $50,000 to pay for the private nursing he needs. I am the only thing standing between that useless man and a pauper's grave." I turned off the television. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Marcus had collapsed onto the floor, his knees hitting the wine-stained rug. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a terror I had never seen before. "You ever wonder how a simple mechanic built an empire like this, Marcus?" I asked, my voice low and steady. "It wasn't through shortcuts. It wasn't through lying. It was through the truth. The truth is the only thing that lasts when everything else burns. And now you are looking at your truth." Marcus crawled toward me, his hands outstretched. "Dad, please, I was scared. Jessica was the one who said those things. I was just trying to protect our image. I didn't mean it." I stepped back, disgusted by the sight of him. "I have been watching you for 5 years, Marcus. I lived in that basement to see if there was a spark of the boy I raised left inside that expensive suit. But all I found was a hollow man. You called me useless while you were standing on my shoulders. You treated me like a beggar while I was paying your mortgage, and then you used my name to justify your own crimes." I pulled a stack of legal documents from my desk. I sat down and looked him in the eye. "I didn't send you to jail, Marcus. This morning I signed a check for $50,000 and returned it to OmniAd. I had my lawyers withdraw the criminal complaint. I did that because the Graves name cannot be dragged through a courtroom by a common thief like you. But don't you ever mistake mercy for weakness. Marcus let out a gasp of relief, thinking he had won. Oh, thank you, Dad. Thank you. I will work so hard. I will make you proud. I ignored him. I have also signed the documents for the Winston Graves Scholarship Fund. As of 10 minutes ago, 99% of my personal wealth, my stocks, my real estate, and my holdings in G Logistics have been transferred into a trust for underprivileged children. Children who actually know the value of a dollar. Children who won't spit on the man who feeds them. Marcus's face went from relief to a deathly chalky white. But what about me? What about the inheritance? You had your inheritance, Marcus. You had it for 30 years. You had the best schools, the best cars, and the best opportunities. You threw it all away for $10. I have removed you from my will. You are fired from G Logistics. You are banned from every Graves property in the country, and you are officially dead to this family. Jerome stepped out of the shadows. He didn't wait for a command. He grabbed Marcus by the collar of his silk robe and hauled him toward the door. Marcus screamed. He begged. He tried to claw at the furniture, but Jerome was a force of nature. I watched as my son was dragged out of the library through the grand foyer and tossed out of the front doors of the mansion, the same doors he had entered with so much greed in his heart just hours before. A week later, I was sitting in the back of my Lincoln driving through a gritty industrial area on the outskirts of Atlanta. I told Jerome to pull over near a rundown car wash. Through the tinted glass, I saw a man kneeling on the wet concrete. He was wearing a stained yellow jumpsuit. He was scrubbing the tires of a mud-caked pickup truck, his hands red from the cold water and the harsh chemicals. It was Marcus. He looked 10 years older. The arrogance was gone. The swagger was gone. He was working a 12-hour shift for minimum wage, the same kind of manual labor he had mocked his entire life. He was starting at the 0 point, finally earning his own bread in the grease and the dirt. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't say a word. I just watched him for a moment. This was his life sentence. Not a prison cell with bars, but the heavy, crushing weight of his own conscience. Every time he saw a luxury car drive by, he would remember the mansion. Every time he saw a $10 bill, he would remember the rain. I pulled the crumpled $10 bill out of my pocket. I handed it to Jerome. Jerome, go give this to that man. Tell him it's a tip from a stranger who knows exactly what he is worth. I watched through the rearview mirror as Jerome handed Marcus the bill. Marcus looked at it, then looked at our car as we pulled away. He dropped his head and started to weep, his tears mixing with the soapy water on the pavement. The $10 father was finally gone. The chairman was back. And the world was finally in balance. True wealth is not measured by the balance in your bank account, but by the integrity in your heart. You can build an empire of gold, but if the foundation is made of lies and betrayal, it will eventually crumble into dust. Honor your roots. Respect the hands that raised you, and never value a temporary luxury over a permanent legacy. Because in the end, the world doesn't care about your title or your suit. It cares about the man you are when you have nothing left but a $10 bill and the truth. Value people over things, and you will never be truly poor.